Jake Lawson was done fighting until they took his son. A quiet town in Texas becomes the front line of a war no one else sees, where a former Special Forces soldier gathers his brothers in arms for one last mission. What begins as a rescue spirals into a battle against a hidden empire of traffickers, mercenaries, and corrupt power masked behind patriotic silence. As the layers peel back, Jake finds himself in a crusade not just to save children, but to rip the rot out of the nation's soul. With every life saved, the cost grows higher, and as the fire fades, new footsteps echo in the ash. What if it never ends? Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. They came. Like ghosts in broad daylight, thunder on two wheels, all chrome and menace, like vultures riding the wind. At first, nobody paid them much attention, just a few bikers rolling through Clear Creek, Texas. But something about them didn't sit right. The way they moved, the way they watched, like they were measuring something, like they were hunting. Clear Creek was the kind of place where American flags still hung on porches and folks left their doors unlocked, because that's how it had always been. A place where the 4th of July parade was the biggest event of the summer, and the church bells still rang on Sunday morning. Jake Lawson chose this place on purpose. Far from noise, far from war. Just him and Ben, his 10-year-old son, living, quiet on 5 acres of Texas dirt, breathing in peace like it was a borrowed thing. That morning started like any other. Jake was up before the sun, brewing coffee in the silence, the house still and cool. Ben came down sleepy-eyed, his hair wild, clutching his tattered stuffed bear that had seen one too many wash cycles. They ate eggs and toast on the porch, watching the mist roll off the fields. Jake raised the American flag at the corner of the porch like he did every morning. "How many stars, Ben?" Ben grinned, pointing. 50. For all the states." Jake gave a slow nod. "That's right. 50 stars, 13 stripes, all earned." It was a ritual, a way of grounding the boy in something solid. Jake had seen too many places where flags meant nothing, where rules were fluid and mercy was rare. He wanted Ben to know better, to grow up safe, to grow up believing that good men still stood between darkness and light. They drove into town just before 9. Jake's truck, a rust-worn '79 Bronco with cracked leather seats and a stubborn carburetor, rattled down Main Street like a tired warhorse. Daisy's diner was already bustling. Miss Edna was setting out her flower baskets. Old man Tillman was sweeping his barbershop steps. Everything just like it always was, but the bikes were new. Jake spotted them first. 8 of them, gleaming black and red, parked outside Carter's Liquor like a pack of wolves sunning their bellies. The riders leaned against their machines, boots up, sunglasses on, smirks that didn't match the time of day, tattoos like war paint, jackets with a red jackal stitched across the back, crimson jackals. Ben noticed them too. Are they bad guys? Jake kept his eyes ahead. Don't stare. He parked at the far end of the street and walked Ben toward the general store. Inside, old man Carver looked rattled, like someone had unplugged the warmth from his voice. "They were in here earlier," Carver muttered as he rang up Jake's supplies. "One of them grabbed Missy by the wrist. She's a kid, Jake, 17. I told him to leave." Jake stared. "What'd they say?" Carver hesitated. "Said I had guts, and that guts tend to spill." Jake's jaw tightened. "What about the sheriff?" "Sheriff ain't done much. Said they're just passing through. But I know a snake. When I see one." Jake didn't say more. He paid, nodded, and walked Ben back to the truck. As they passed the bikes, one of the jackals called out, "Nice wheels, old man. Bet it drives like your grandpa." Jake didn't respond, didn't flinch, just opened the door for Ben and climbed in. But the silence that followed was thicker than smoke. Back at the house, Ben played out in the yard with the dogs. Jake watched. From the porch, his mind elsewhere, he hadn't been a soldier in years. Retired, low profile, off-grid. But instincts don't rust. And something about those men, something in their posture, their silence, their confidence, it itched at him. Not the kind of itch you scratch, the kind that makes you start checking locks twice. That night, the wind shifted. Jake noticed the quiet first, no screen door creak, no dog barking, just stillness. He walked the hallway and glanced into Ben's room. The bed was empty, the sheets untouched. He moved faster then, room to room, backyard, barn. He called Ben's name, voice rising. "Ben! Benny, where are you?" No answer. The dog circled, confused. The barn lights flickered on as Jake kicked. The door open. Nothing. No signs of struggle. No tracks in the dirt. No broken windows. Just absence. He called the sheriff. The man came 20 minutes later, his cruiser kicking up dust. Sheriff Doolin was pushing 60. Belly first, eyes tired, maybe. "The boy wandered off," he said, scratching his head. Jake stared at him. "Ben doesn't wander. He's trained. He checks in every hour on the dot. You know that." The sheriff shifted his weight. "You think it's the bikers?" Jake didn't answer. He was already turning back toward the house. That night, Jake sat alone in the barn. The old trunk was still there beneath a tarp, untouched since the day he promised to leave that life behind. He uncovered it slowly. Inside were ghosts, tactical gear, MREs, surveillance maps, a Browning high power in a sealed case. And at the bottom, an old sat phone. He powered it on. It blinked twice, still connected. Jake stared at the keypad. There was one number, one code. He hadn't dialed it in 12 years. He pressed the buttons. 3 rings. A voice answered, grizzled, alert, ghost. Jake spoke 3 words. They took Ben. The line went silent. Then, "We're coming." Jake hung up. The war wasn't behind him anymore. It was home. The sun rose slower the next morning, or maybe it just felt that way. The air over clear. Creek had turned heavy, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Jake Lawson hadn't slept. He'd sat on the edge of Ben's bed all night, staring at the small desk where his son had once drawn rockets and battle scenes and flags. The crumpled blanket still held the faint scent of childhood, soap, crayons, grass. Every corner of that room screamed of innocence. And all Jake could hear was silence. He didn't tell the sheriff he was heading out. He didn't tell the neighbors either. By the time the town was waking up, Jake was already moving down the edge of Route 18, his truck rattling toward the Jackal's den. He'd done his homework during the night. The Crimson Jackals weren't just any gang. They were transplants from the Louisiana backcountry, veterans of the meth trade, with whispers tying them to a few disappearances further east. They weren't loud. They didn't vandalize. They infected. Quietly, like rust under a truck frame. Jake knew their kind, men who spoke with smirks instead of words, who didn't need to threaten. They just showed up, and that was enough. Their clubhouse was a gutted steel mill just outside of town. The front gates were chained, but one of them stood open. Deliberately, Jake figured. A message. "Come in if you dare." He parked a quarter-mile out and walked the rest, boots crunching gravel, his back straight, his eyes cold. 2 men loitered near the entrance. One of them leaned against a low-rider chopper, the other picking at his teeth with a pocket knife. They looked him over without interest at first. But as he got closer, the expressions changed. Not fear. Something else. Curiosity. Jake stopped just past the gate. "I want to talk to your boss," he said. The taller one, the one with the knife, gave a slow grin. "You got a name?" "Jake Lawson." That did it. The knife paused. The smile widened. "Soldier." "Boy," the man chuckled. "You're braver than you look." He turned and whistled toward the building. Inside the mill, the walls were graffiti-covered, windows smashed and boarded, a concrete floor painted with oil stains and beer spills. The air stank of gasoline, stale sweat, and something more sour. Beneath it, music pulsed from a speaker somewhere in the shadows, but it wasn't loud, just enough to keep the place off balance. Jake kept walking, past a pool table, past a half-dismantled bike, past 3 men playing cards who barely looked up. Then came the man himself. Ray's. He was seated in a throne-like chair made from salvaged car parts, leaning back with one leg draped over the armrest, a cigar smouldering between his fingers. His beard was thick and neat, grey woven into black. He wore rings, too many, and his eyes gleamed with the kind of joy only found in the cruel. Jake stopped in front of him. "You took my son." Ray's exhaled smoke slowly, lazily. "I don't think we've been properly introduced," he said, "but I like your style, straight to business." Jake didn't move. Ray's grinned. "Ben, right? Cute kid, brave, bit loud, but that's normal." At his age, something flickered in Jake's eyes, a storm behind glass, but he held it back. "Where is he?" Ray's stood, walked in slow circles like a preacher before a sermon. "See, Jake, can I call you Jake? You've got a problem. You're thinking this is a movie. You show up, you threaten me, maybe throw a punch, and I fold. That's not how this works." Jake's hands curled into fists at his sides. "No ransom, no demands," Jake said. "That tells me this isn't about money." Ray's turned, nodding. "Smart man." "It's not." Jake stepped forward. "Then what? Is it?" Ray's leaned in close enough for Jake to smell the whiskey on his breath. "Collateral," he whispered. Jake struck him. One punch, clean, brutal, the kind that came from muscle memory, not rage. Ray's stumbled back, blood blooming from his nose. The room went dead quiet. Every jackal froze. Some stood, a few reached for weapons, but none moved. Not yet. Ray's straightened, licking the blood from his upper lip. "You just made this personal, soldier." Jake didn't flinch. "It was already personal." Ray's nodded slowly, still smiling. "War it is, then." Jake turned and walked out, his heart pounding, but his steps even. He didn't look back. Outside, the sky had turned gunmetal grey. A storm was coming, real and otherwise. Jake climbed into his Bronco, slammed the door, and drove fast but not recklessly. He knew what had to happen next. No more waiting. No. More hope that someone else would do the right thing. When he got home, he went straight to the barn, the sat phone still lying on the workbench from the night before. He picked it up and scrolled through the old numbers, contacts that hadn't heard from him in years, men who'd vanished after the wars, ghosts of a past that never really let go. He pressed one. It rang once, then a voice. "Doc here." Jake exhaled. "It's time." Another call. This one to Ghost, then Brick, then others. Men with scars, men with purpose. Each one answered with the same word. "When?" Jake sent the location. Ben was gone, but Jake had never been more certain about what came next. They had drawn first. Blood, and now he was bringing fire. The wind cut through the Texas plains with a dry hiss, kicking up dirt and carrying with it something heavy, something ancient. Jake stood alone by the fence line at dawn, his eyes locked on the horizon. The sun had barely broken through the clouds, but his heart had already outrun it. His hands, calloused and still steady, gripped the sat phone tighter than before. He wasn't a desperate man. He was a soldier with a target, a father with fire under his skin. He walked back to the barn in silence. Each step echoed like a memory. He remembered the feeling of boots sinking into Afghan dust, the scent of diesel in the air, and the weight of a rifle in his hands. That man, Jake Lawson, the operator, the ghost, the tactician. He was still inside, buried beneath years of small-town peace and fatherhood. And now that man was clawing his way to the surface. The map was already laid out on the workbench. Pins marked every warehouse, every back road, every jackal haunt he'd tracked in the past year. At first, they'd only been a whisper on the radio, a name in police logs, a cautionary tale traded in veteran bars. But now they were real. They had his son. Jake's pen circled a spot northeast of town, an abandoned airstrip. If Ben was alive, if he was being held for leverage or punishment, it'd be somewhere isolated, somewhere off-grid. That strip had been silent since 2009. No cameras, no patrols. But it had fences, hangars, shadows. The kind of place monsters like to hide in. He took a breath, then dialed the third number on the list. It connected instantly. "Brick," a gravel voice answered. "It's Jake." Silence. Then, "No shit. I need boots on the ground. How bad?" They took. "Ben?" The line went dead for a second, like the weight of those words needed room to settle. "You got me. Where?" Jake gave the coordinates. "Bring tools." Brick didn't ask which kind. Next came Ghost. Jake didn't even need to explain. The voice on the other end said, "ETA 36 hours. Then Doc, the quietest of the bunch. Always. Calm, always precise. He had saved Jake's life once, during a night op that went to hell in Fallujah. "I'm bringing supplies. Trauma gear, sat drone, and recon optics." Jake nodded, even though no one could see it. "I owe you." "You owe me nothing." They took a child. One by one, the calls went out. Some of them hadn't spoken in years. Some were scattered across the country in small towns just like Clear Creek. But when the call came, when Jake Lawson said the code, Echo Delta, they packed. Guns, armor, night vision, and a piece of themselves they'd buried after the wars. Because when a soldier calls for help, you answer. And when a child's taken, you don't wait for permission. You move. Jake spent the rest of the day preparing. He built a field HQ in the barn. Old tech, nothing traceable. Manual radios, dry erase boards, a case of encrypted thumb drives loaded with known Jackal associates, black market routes, and traffic patterns. He reviewed local police chatter on an old ham rig, filtering for anything suspicious, unmarked vans, heavy bikes in convoys, broken windows where silence used to live. He found plenty, but nothing led to Ben. Not yet. That night, the first one, arrived Dottige. Brick. His truck rolled in after sundown, an unassuming Ford F-250 with Arizona plates. He stepped out like a bear waking from hibernation, broad, bearded, with hands like anvils. He didn't smile, didn't ask questions. He gave Jake a nod, then walked straight to the barn and started unloading. Body armor, ammo, a crate marked "Forget-me-nots" that clanked like it held a lifetime of rage. "I thought you were out," Jake said. "I was, until now." They didn't need more words. Brick didn't do well with talk. He worked. By midnight, they had the beginnings of a supply chain. Food, weapons, comms, a battlefield disguised as a barn. The next day, Ghost showed up. He came on a motorcycle with no license plate, his helmet matte black, his body lean and wiry. He dismounted without a sound, like he hadn't made a noise in years. Jake hadn't seen him since Kabul. He still wore those same gloves, half-fingered, frayed, stained. "Perimeter clear," Ghost said, scanning the tree line. "Spotted a Jackal bike trailing me 2 towns back. Lost it near the quarry." "There. Watching," Jake said. "They know something's coming, they just don't know who." Ghost carried no bags. Just a rifle, a sidearm, and a flash drive in a weatherproof capsule. He uploaded everything into Jake's laptop. Jackal affiliates, front companies, rumors of children being moved across state lines. The patterns were dirty and wide, but one thing was clear: this wasn't just about Ben. Other kids had gone missing, quietly, forgotten by the system, not by Jake. That night, Doc arrived in a minivan. His calm presence filled the barn like a warm fog. He hugged Jake, briefly, tightly, and then got to work. His kits were pristine, labeled ready. He ran wires, connected a mobile power cell, set up a makeshift clinic in the horse stall with field-grade sutures and surgical tools. "In case it gets messy," he said. Jake watched them all move. Old friends, older soldiers, each of them wounded in different ways, none of them broken. They laughed once or twice, but it was a hollow sound. The kind of laugh men share when death is near and they've already made peace with it. Over whiskey in the barn, Brick finally asked, "Why your boy?" Jake didn't blink. "Because I said no." Brick raised an eyebrow. "They came through, here a few months ago. Offered protection to the school, a donation to keep trouble away. I told them to go to hell. I made calls. I sent their plate numbers to a contact in the marshal's office. Didn't think they'd connect it, but they did." Jake nodded. "They want to make a point. Ghost lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. They made the wrong one. Doc stood quietly near the door, his eyes on the dark. "There's something else," Jake said, pulling out a folder. "Ben's not the only one. 5 other kids, all under 12, missing from 3 towns across the state line. No ransom, no suspects, just vanished." Brick muttered something under his breath. "They're trafficking," Ghost said. "This is bigger than just a gang. This is a network." Jake looked at each of them. "We don't call the feds, not yet. We don't wait on red tape. We get Ben. We blow the roof off this thing, and we burn it down." The room went quiet. Doc raised his glass first. "Then let's begin." Outside, the wind howled against the barn walls, like the war itself had risen to meet them. But inside, something stronger had returned. Brotherhood. Purpose. Fire. Jake Lawson wasn't alone anymore, and the jackals were about to learn what it meant to pick a fight with the wrong kind of men. The road leading to Jake's property was just a strip of cracked asphalt winding through miles of dry Texas grass, but by the 3rd day it had become a corridor of ghosts returning to life. One after another they arrived, on bikes and trucks on foot, carrying nothing but gear, muscle, and memories too dark to speak aloud. Jake stood by the barn as each vehicle rolled in. No salutes, no formal greetings, just handshakes, firm nods, and the quiet understanding of men who had once stood together in places the world had forgotten. There was Boone, the sniper who could hold a shot through wind and rain and still recite scripture under his breath. Deke, the breacher, limping slightly from a leg that still carried shrapnel. Ranger, a wiry man with eyes that never blinked and fingers that twitched whenever he got too quiet. And there were others, men Jake hadn't seen since Kandahar, Mosul, and God-forsaken hills, where they left pieces of themselves buried under the dust. They had names like Claymore, Twitch, Gator, and Smoke. They had lost brothers, marriages, homes, and time, but they hadn't lost their edge. By nightfall, the barn wasn't a barn anymore. It was a base. Cots lined the walls, maps blanketed the tables, and the soft glow of screens showed the movements of the crimson jackals across county lines. Every hour, Ghost updated the team with field notes from his infiltration. He'd already mapped out 3 of their known drug runs, identified 2 corrupt deputies who had been bought off with silence, and confirmed a disturbing new fact. Ben wasn't the only one. 2 more kids had gone missing just days before Ben. One from Edenville, one from La Mesa, both small towns, both children under 12. One had a single mother, the other lived with his grandfather. No ransom, no news reports, no local search efforts that went anywhere. They had simply vanished into the cracks, and the cracks were getting wider. Jake stared at the photos on the board. Ben, 10 years old, with his crooked smile and baseball cap. Amanda Green, age 8, last seen walking home from school. Tyler Riggins, 11, missing since a church retreat. These weren't isolated incidents. This was a pattern, a system. The jackals were just the surface. Below them, something bigger, something colder, was pulling strings. The team sat in a circle that night under the yellow light of the barn. Jake stood with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. His voice was low, steady. They're moving people, not just product. They're taking kids, using them to send messages, or worse, and no one's stopping it. He paused, letting the weight of it settle. They took Ben because I pushed back, because I made noise, but now it's bigger than that. They're part of something more organized, something protected. They've got money, they've got law enforcement in their pocket, and they think we won't come. Deke spat into a bucket. They're wrong. Jake looked around the circle. We're not just getting my son back. We're pulling the whole damn rug out from under them, and we're going to do it the way we always have. Quiet, clean, fast. Boone leaned forward, tapping the edge of a satellite map. I've got a lookout post outside of Miller's Ridge. They've got a drop house there. Minimal traffic, 2 dirt roads in, no cameras. If they're holding kids, it's probably there or the airstrip you marked. Ghost nodded. They rotate the bikes every 48 hours. There's a pattern. Ben was taken 3 nights ago. If they follow their usual route, they'll move him within 72 hours. After that, he disappears. Jake said nothing. For a moment, just stared at the time window scribbled in red on the corner of the board. Less than 30 hours left. Doc began sorting gear. We'll need a safe house. Staging area. If we extract any kids, we need a medical zone. Quiet, away from the roads. I've got a cabin up near Bull Creek, Brick offered. No one's used it in years. It's off-grid. Solar panels, enough food and water for a week. Jake nodded. That's our fallback. We don't bring the kids home until we're sure the town is clear. The jackals are watching. We expose them too early. We lose everything. Outside, the wind picked up. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance, promising rain. The men began assembling packs, checking rifles, loading magazines. It was like second nature, every action smooth, deliberate, wordless. Some of them hadn't handled weapons in years, but their bodies remembered. War does that. It tattoos. Muscle memory into your bones. Later that night, Jake stepped outside alone. He stared up at the sky, stars muted behind heavy clouds. The silence around him wasn't peaceful anymore. It was waiting. Behind him, the barn door creaked. Ghost appeared in the shadows, his voice barely above a whisper. "You all right?" Jake didn't answer right away. Then, "Ben's tough, smarter than I ever was at his age, but he's just a kid. And I can't stop thinking, what if I'm already too late?" Ghost stepped beside him. "You're not. He's alive." Jake turned to him. "You saw something?" Ghost hesitated. "A warehouse outside of town. I was scoping the perimeter when one of them dropped a pack. Inside was a USB drive. No markings, just left there, almost like they wanted me to find it." Jake's stomach turned cold. "You watch it." Ghost shook his head. "Didn't have the gear, but I didn't bring it back. I left it in place. I think it's bait. They know we're coming. They're trying to push you." Jake looked back at the barn, where his team was still assembling. "The plan? Then let them." Ghost exhaled smoke. "You ever think we wouldn't make it home? Back then, I mean," Jake answered without looking away from the sky. "I didn't think we had homes to come back to." Ghost nodded. "Now we do. So we fight like hell to protect them." The next morning came with gray clouds and the scent of rain on the wind. The men ate quietly. Black coffee, hard bread, protein bars. No chatter, no music. Only the rustling of gear and the click of weapons being cleaned. Boone moved to his lookout post before sunrise, vanishing into the tree line with a pack and a radio. Deke ran a sweep of the road with Claymore. Ranger and Smoke tested drone routes above the airstrip. Everyone had a role. Jake stood at the barn, Docker as they moved, watching the team operate like clockwork. This was no longer a rescue mission. It was the beginning of a war, and for the first time in years, Jake Lawson felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The warehouse looked ordinary from the outside, just another rotting structure in a forgotten corner of Clear Creek's industrial outskirts, where old tools and broken machinery waited for rust to finish what time had started. But Jake knew better. A building like that didn't stay quiet without purpose. He sat across the street in a borrowed work van, binoculars pressed to his eyes, watching through the smudged windshield as 3 jackals rolled up on their bikes and disappeared through the side entrance without so much as a knock. Inside that building was something, maybe someone, maybe Ben. Ghost sat beside him, motionless, scribbling notes on a small pad, his pen scratching out a map from memory. Exit, points, line of sight markers, potential blind spots. They had eyes on the warehouse for 6 hours now. No deliveries, no official traffic, just comings and goings of men who carried nothing in and walked out laughing. "This isn't a stash house," Ghost said finally, not looking up. "It's too clean." Jake lowered the binoculars. "Then what is it?" Ghost drew a small X on the left side of the sketch. "They're not hiding drugs here. They're hiding people." Jake stared at the warehouse again, his stomach knotting. "Ben? Could be. Could be others." Ghost's voice stayed calm, but his eyes were hard. Whatever's going on in there, it's being kept quiet for a reason. That night, the team met back at the barn. Ghost's sketch was spread across the main table, and Boone had circled the area in red ink. I saw 3 trucks move out after midnight last night, he reported. No lights, no plates. They headed north toward the highway. One of them was pulling a trailer. Anyone follow? Jake asked. Boone shook his head. No chance. Too open. Would have blown the whole thing. Doc stepped in, rolling up a set of images captured by a drone. They showed blurry outlines of movement through the warehouse, rows of boxes, a makeshift office space, and one shadowed room near the back with a single hanging light, and what looked like a heavy lock on the outside. They're not storing product, Doc said. Not drugs. These guys are middlemen now, facilitators. For what? Brick asked, arms crossed. Jake already knew the answer. He'd seen the signs days ago. The pattern, the silence, the absence of ransom demands, trafficking. The word hung in the air like poison. Deke swore under his breath. Ranger looked away, even Brick's fists clenched at his sides. These men had seen horror, had caused it, survived it. But this was different. This was evil, systemic, organized, and it was operating under their noses. We can't go to the cops, Jake said. Not yet. They're either too scared or already bought. Boone nodded. I've seen it before. You push too fast. You tip your hand. These guys vanish into thin air. Doc tapped the drone photo. This lock, right here. It's reinforced. Different from the others. It's the only door that doesn't match the structure's age. Jake's voice lowered. That's where they keep them. He didn't say Ben's name. He didn't have to. They planned the recon for that night. No direct engagement, just infiltration, extraction of information, maybe a bug or two placed in the right corners. Ghost would go in. Boone on overwatch. Ranger running radio. Jake leading. Coordination from the fallback point. They moved just after midnight. Clouds smothered the moonlight, and rain began to fall in thin, whispering sheets. The warehouse's gravel lot glittered like glass under the flash of lightning. Ghost slipped through the gap in the fence, barely visible in the dark. Boone's voice crackled once through the comms. All clear on the south end, no heat signatures moving outside. Inside, Ghost worked like a phantom. He planted a camera in the corner of the hallway, another in the main storage room. He slipped a USB, tap into the office router, and downloaded files onto a drive he kept taped inside his boot. Then he found the locked room. The smell hit him first. Sweat, fear, something sour. He placed a small listening device beneath the frame and pressed his ear gently against the cold steel. There were no voices, but then shuffling, a cough, muffled, breathing. Someone was in there. He exhaled once and pulled back. No breach, not yet. Back at the barn, they played the audio. Children's voices. Not screaming, not crying, but whispering, afraid, waiting. Jake turned his head and stared at the wall for a long moment, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack his molars. Ben was in there. He knew it now, not with logic, but with instinct. That sound, that silence in a child's voice. That was Ben. They gathered the files Ghost had taken from the router. Doc decrypted them. There were names, drop locations, payments, but most chilling, photos, profiles of children with coded labels beside them. YM10, FC9, BL8, gender, ethnicity, age, like inventory. Jake pushed back from the table. He walked out into the night, rain hitting his face in cool, even drops. He stared at the horizon, fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to scream. Instead, he went back inside and spoke without looking at anyone. This isn't just about Ben anymore, Doc nodded. We're dealing with a trafficking ring that spans at least 3 states. The Jackals are just one link in the chain. They receive, they transport, they disappear the evidence. Boone looked down at the list. Fake foster homes, unlicensed transport. We're not just talking backdoor deals. This is a machine. Ghost tapped the edge of the table. And if we don't move fast, that machine's going to eat Ben alive. Jake looked at each man. Then we dismantle it, one piece at a time, Brick grunted. You sure about that? Because once we start hitting them, they'll hit back, and this town's gonna feel it." Jake nodded. "Let them come. But first we hit that warehouse. We get those kids out." "Tomorrow?" Boone asked. Jake stared at the photo of the locked room. "No, tonight." They all knew what that meant. No turning back, no waiting for daylight or backup or due process. This wasn't justice in a court. This was justice in its rawest form, delivered by the only hand still willing to carry it. They checked their weapons, loaded gear, confirmed routes and fallback plans. Boone would take the northern ridge. Ghost would lead breach. Doc would set up triage at the safe house. Jake would ride with Brick and Ranger, lead the entry, and find his son. As the final plans were drawn, Jake took the photo of Ben from the board and tucked it into his chest pocket. His voice was low. "Calm. We bring them home." No one argued, because this wasn't just a mission. This was war. And for the men in that barn, war was the only language they never forgot how to speak. The fire started just after midnight. At first, the flicker in the distance looked like someone burning trash or lighting a bonfire too close to the road. But within minutes, the glow grew darker, angrier, orange light swallowing the sky behind the tree line. Jake was first to react. He dropped the wrench he was holding and ran to the barn door. The others followed, each man wordless as instinct took over. By the time they reached the main road, the screaming had begun. It was the Winters place. An old clapboard house on the edge of Clear Creek, set back behind a wind-beaten fence and a rusted swing set. Jake's Bronco tore through the wet gravel, tires spitting mud as they reached the property. Flames towered above the roof, licking at the sky. The smoke was black, heavy, violent. Mrs. Winters was on the front lawn in a nightgown, cradling her toddler with soot-stained arms, coughing so hard she could barely breathe. Her husband stumbled out seconds later with their teenage daughter, both covered in ash, eyes wide with terror. A propane tank exploded in the back, sending a shockwave that knocked the mailbox across the yard and shattered the porch windows. Jake didn't wait. He and Brick rushed toward the house, even as debris rained down from the roof. They kicked in the side door, shouting into the thick smoke. Doc grabbed the girl and started checking for burns. Boone kept the driveway clear, weapon in hand, scanning. The tree line for movement. The fire brigade didn't show for another 12 minutes. By then, it was too late. The house was gone. Jake stood beside the wreckage, his hands black with soot, sweat pouring down his neck. He looked over at Mrs. Winters, her face streaked with tears and ash, her body wrapped in a wool blanket that couldn't stop her shaking. She looked up at him with hollow eyes, and her voice cracked like glass. "I only told you. I only told you about the warehouse." Jake didn't speak. He didn't have to. The message was clear. This wasn't a warning. It was punishment. That morning, the town of Clear Creek woke to the stench of smoke and the sound of rumors flying like bullets. Through whispers, the Crimson Jackals had never hidden before, never needed to. But now they were making themselves known, loud, proud, angry. They weren't just defending turf anymore. They were retaliating. Jake met with the sheriff at dawn. Doolin looked 10 years older than he had just 2 days before. His hands trembled as he poured coffee in a paper cup at the edge of the emergency response tent. "You see it now?" Jake asked. Doolin nodded, eyes locked on the blackened shell of the Winters house. "They're escalating. They're declaring war." "I don't have the manpower for this," the sheriff said. "We've got 4 deputies. 2 of them won't show today. You think I don't know they're scared? Hell, I'm scared too." Jake stared at him. "Then deputize civilians, the ones who still have backbone. I'll train them." Doolin looked doubtful. "You want me to arm civilians against a biker gang with military-grade hardware and no rules?" Jake didn't blink. "You don't have a choice." Doolin took a long sip of his coffee, then finally nodded. Back at the barn, the mood had shifted. The team wasn't just planning an assault anymore. They were building resistance. Brick started leading drills in the pasture behind Jake's property, shotgun basics, breach and clear techniques, how to move through a hallway without getting yourself or your neighbor killed. A handful of locals showed up by midday. Ranchers, mechanics, even a retired schoolteacher with a steadier hand than some men half his age. Ghost mapped out choke points across the town, intersections where jackal convoys could be cut off, access, roads that could be blocked, rural paths they might use for escapes or ambushes. Boone created a rotation for overwatch. Volunteers on rooftops, in bell towers, perched in barns with binoculars and radios. Deke built IEDs from fertilizer and scrap metal, stashed in waterproof crates labeled livestock feed. They weren't waiting anymore. They were preparing. That evening, a car pulled up to Jake's driveway. A silver sedan with civilian plates, dusted and nondescript. A man stepped out, mid-50s, clean-shaven collared shirt with no tie. Jake met him at the gate, hand resting on the pistol at his side. The man showed a badge. Name's Reynolds. DHS. Jake narrowed his eyes. You're a long way from Washington. I heard what happened, Reynolds said, glancing at the smoke trail still faintly visible in the distance. And I heard you're stirring the pot. Jake folded his arms. They kidnapped my son. Reynolds didn't flinch. I know, and I'm not here to stop you, but I am here to warn you. Jake waited. There's more than just bikers involved in this. The jackals are muscle, sure, but they're part of a pipeline. One that runs deeper than local law enforcement or small-town politics. Fake orphanages, front companies. We've been tracking pieces of it for years. But it's like punching shadows. Jake's expression didn't change. Reynolds leaned closer. If you go in blind, they'll vanish. They'll bury your boy so deep you'll never find him. Jake stepped forward. Then help me? Reynolds hesitated. We can't authorize that. Then stay out of my way. Reynolds didn't argue. He just left a card on the hood of Jake's truck and drove off. That night, as thunder rumbled in the distance and the last embers of the winter's home smoldered in silence, Jake gathered his men. We go on the offensive tomorrow, he said. Ranger asked, You sure we're ready? Jake nodded. They hit a family, burned them out of their home. They're not hiding anymore. That means they're getting sloppy. That means they're vulnerable. He walked over to the whiteboard, circled 3 locations, the warehouse, the airstrip, and a cabin in the hills, identified by Boone as a possible transport checkpoint. We hit one. We watch the others. When they scramble, we follow. Ghost leaned forward. And if Ben's already moved, Jake's voice dropped, then we follow the fire until we find him. There were no cheers, no salutes, just the quiet, tightening of gear, the low click of magazines loading, and the silent understanding that tomorrow they would bring war into the open. Not for revenge, for justice, for Ben, for every child taken and every house burned, because the soul of Clear Creek wasn't just under siege, it was screaming to be saved. It was the smell that first pulled Jake from sleep. Wet oil, burnt copper, something acrid and metallic, bleeding into the early morning air. He sat up on the cot in the barn and listened. Nothing at first, just the low hum of Ghost's security monitors and the faint rustle of Boone shifting in his sleep. Then came the knock, 3 slow taps on the barn's side door. Jake grabbed his sidearm and moved without a sound. Ghost appeared beside him a second later, rifle in hand. Brick flanked the opposite side. The door creaked open just enough to reveal Boone's silhouette, jacket soaked, beard dripping with dew. He held something small between 2 fingers. A USB drive, no markings, no casing, just raw metal. Found it by the warehouse fence, Boone said. Planted, not dropped. Jake took it, frowning. You sure it's not bait? Could be, Ghost said. But if it is, they wanted us to see it. They plugged it into an isolated laptop. Offline, shielded. Doc hovered near the screen, scanning for malware. Nothing triggered, no viruses. Just one file. A video. Jake didn't speak. He hit play. At first there was just darkness, then a click. The camera flickered to life, grainy, low-res. The light shifted and there he was, Ben, sitting on a folding chair in the middle of an empty room. His wrists bound in front of him. A bruise darkened his cheek. His shirt was torn, but he was breathing. He looked straight into the camera, eyes wide, glassy. He was trying to be brave, trying not to cry, but his voice shook as he began to speak. "My name is Ben Lawson. I'm 10 years old." He paused, looked off camera, then back. "My daddy is Jake Lawson. He can't save me. He's not coming." Jake's jaw tightened. A sound tore through his throat, low and involuntary. The kind of sound a man makes when something sacred inside him is torn loose. The others stood frozen, watching, their faces stone. Boone clenched his fists. Doc looked down. The video ended as abruptly as it started. No threats, no demands, just pain. Jake stood still, breathing through his nose, eyes locked on the black screen. For a long time, no one said a word. Then Brick whispered, "They made him say that." Jake didn't respond. He turned and walked out into the rain. Ghost followed. He found Jake out by the fence, staring into the soaked pasture, fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. "I need you clear," Ghost said quietly. "This next step, we can't afford hesitation." Jake didn't turn around. "They made my son say I wouldn't come for him." Ghost nodded. "Then prove him wrong." Jake's breath came fast, hard. He shook his head once, as if trying to push the weight off his shoulders. Then he whispered, "We go tonight." Inside the barn, the plan shifted. No more surveillance, no more watching. The warehouse was their target, and now they had proof that at least one child was inside. Maybe more. There would be no negotiations, no waiting for permission or warrants. They were done playing quiet. Doc began packing trauma kits, sterilizing tools, prepping sedatives in case the kids were drugged. Brick double-checked explosives. Small charges, just enough to breach and blind. Boone adjusted his scope for nighttime visibility. Ghost walked the perimeter, syncing with lookout teams posted along the outer roads. Jake stood at the center of it all, the command returning to his posture, his voice sharper now, focused. There was grief in him, but it had transformed into something colder. "Resolve. Entry through the west loading dock," he said. "Ghost and I breach. Brick follows with smoke. Boone takes the northeast tower. Anyone moves without a vest, they go down. Doc and Ranger secure the children. We're in and out under 4 minutes." "What if it's a trap?" Boone asked. Jake looked at him. "Then we spring it." By nightfall, they were in position. Rain fell hard, masking sound and shadows. The warehouse sat quiet, a lone light flickering near the side door. From the ridge, Boone reported 2 guards, one pacing near the loading dock, the other smoking by the side lot. "Permission to drop them?" he asked over the comms. "Wait," Jake said. "Let them think we're ghosts until we're inside." Ghost moved first, silent, low, a knife in hand. The man near the dock never saw it coming. He slumped before he hit the ground. Jake dragged the body behind a rusted bin and signaled forward. They stacked against the loading dock. Ghost rigged the door. Brick lit the smoke. Jake counted down. 3, 2, 1. The door blew inward, smoke filling the hallway in thick waves. Ghost and Jake moved like lightning, clearing corners, dropping 2 more guards before they could draw their weapons. A siren screamed briefly from deeper inside, but Boone silenced it with a well-placed shot to the junction box. Inside the warehouse, chaos unfolded. Men shouted, scrambled, some armed, some running. Brick breached a side office and tossed in a flashbang. The blast echoed like thunder. Doc moved fast, finding the locked room near the back, just like in the drone footage. He called it out. "Got them! Doors reinforced!" Jake reached it first. The lock was industrial. No time for finesse. "Stand clear!" Brick stepped up, placed a shaped charge and nodded. The explosion was contained but deafening. The door buckled and fell. Smoke rushed into the room. Cries rose from inside. Children's voices, high-pitched and terrified. Jake pushed through first. He saw them, 5 kids, all younger than 12. Eyes wide, arms raised, some crying, some too stunned to move, but one chair sat empty. No Ben. Doc moved quickly, kneeling beside a boy who was barely conscious. "Sedated," he said. They were prepping them to move. Jake looked around the room, walls bare, no signs of Ben. He stepped back into the hall, breathing hard. Ghost approached. "He's not here." Jake nodded, his face unreadable. "Pull the others out. We'll regroup." Brick helped carry one of the smaller girls. Ranger led the others. Outside, Boone covered them as they loaded into the van parked behind the tree line. The kids were safe. For now. But Jake stood still, rain soaking through his jacket, staring at the warehouse like it had betrayed him. Then his radio crackled. "A girl just said something," Doc whispered. "She drew a truck. Red skull on the front." Jake froze. He knew that truck. Raised, Jake keyed his mic. "What else?" "She said the man with the silver tooth took Ben, said he was special, said he was going to be delivered in person." Jake's pulse thudded. In his ears, Ray's had him, and he wasn't hiding behind foot soldiers or warehouses. He was making this personal. Jake climbed into the Bronco and slammed the door. The others followed. The hunt wasn't over. It had only just begun. The safe house was nothing more than a sagging A-frame tucked behind a grove of juniper and pine, a half-forgotten relic of hunting seasons past. Moss clung to the roof. The air smelled of old timber and gun oil. Inside, the walls were bare, save for a mounted deer head and a faded Texas flag nailed to the back room. But to Jake, it was the perfect place to regroup. Off-grid, quiet, forgotten by everyone but Brick, who'd inherited it from an uncle long dead and mostly unloved. The children rescued from the warehouse were spread across makeshift beds, bundled, in blankets and oversized jackets. Doc moved from one to the next, checking vitals, applying ointments to bruises, whispering calm into their ears. Most of the kids hadn't spoken much, but their eyes said everything. Wide, haunted, the kind of stare you only get when you've seen things too terrible to name. Only one of them, a girl named Jenny, seemed to have retained any clarity. It was she who told them about the truck with the red skull, the man with the silver tooth, the words, "special delivery." It had hit Jake like a blow to the ribs. Reyes hadn't just taken Ben, he was moving him himself. Personally, Jake stood outside on the porch watching the rain. Ghost approached from the shadows, his boots silent on the wet wood. He handed Jake a burner phone. "Intercepted radio chatter on the Jackal frequency," Ghost said. "They're rattled. Warehouse breach spooked them. They've upped their timelines. Moving faster. Less protocol, more slop." "Any mention of Ben?" Jake asked, already knowing the answer. Ghost shook his head. "No names. But they're using different routes now, cutting across state lines, avoiding digital paths. We're running out of time." Jake clenched the phone in his hand. His knuckles ached from how often he found himself like this lately. Tense. Wound, ready to break something or someone. The image of Ben in that video, eyes forced open, reading those rehearsed lines like a hostage of war, replayed over and over in his mind. It wasn't just fury now. It was desperation honed to a blade. "We need to know where Reyes is headed," Jake said. "Then we put someone inside," Ghost replied. Silence fell between them. Ghost was already ahead of him. "I still have my badge. Old ID, still works. In the right circles, I can be anyone you want me to be. Fed, merc, dealer. They'll check. Not if I give them something they need." Jake looked out across the trees, weighing the risk. "They catch you, they won't." Inside the safe house, Brick and Boone were assembling gear on the kitchen table. Ammo, flashbangs, radios, explosives wrapped in wax paper. Tools of a trade none of them wanted to revisit, but all of them knew better than their own handwriting. Ranger walked in with a map of the Tri-County area, heavily marked with potential transfer routes, back roads, and old rail stations. "Ghost thinks they're headed west," Ranger said. "There's a convoy set to leave tomorrow night. Unmarked semis, no VINs, no digital manifests. If they're moving kids, that's how they'll do it." "Who's running escort?" Jake asked. Brick pointed to a name circled in red. "Griggs." Jake stiffened. The room went still. "That Griggs?" Doc asked. Jake nodded once. "You son of a bitch," Boone muttered. "You trained with him, didn't you?" Jake didn't answer right away. He just stared at the name. "Same unit," he finally said. "Different soul. Griggs had been one of theirs once. quiet, calculating, a tactician with a talent for finding the most efficient path to victory, no matter how brutal. But something had shifted after the last deployment. He'd gone private, then disappeared. The next time Jake heard his name, it was whispered in connection with mercenary work, protection for smugglers, training for cartels, silent enforcement in foreign wars that weren't supposed to exist. Now he was guarding traffickers. Grigsel. "See through Ghost," Boone warned. Jake turned to Ghost. "Can you do it?" Ghost gave a small shrug. "I'll wear a new face." "No mistakes," Jake said. "We don't get a second chance." That night, they built a profile for Ghost, an identity layered with enough truth to pass first contact. He would pose as a former intelligence contractor turned fixer, disgruntled and willing to work for a price. They forged documents, rerouted his digital footprint, created fake phone logs and financial trails. Brick mocked up a crate of fake contraband to act as his calling card. Suppressed weapons, encrypted tech, pharmaceuticals that screamed black market. By dawn, Ghost was gone. Jake stood on the porch, watching the trees again. His son's voice, still trapped in his head. He hadn't told the others, but something inside him was shifting, a coldness he hadn't felt since his last deployment. Not rage, not grief, something harder. Like stone. Later that morning, Ranger intercepted a shortwave message. Jackal frequency again, partially scrambled. It wasn't long, just a few lines of code followed by GPS coordinates. Ghost's voice came over the encrypted line 15 minutes later. "I'm in." "They took the bait." He spoke in clipped bursts. "They're spooked. Griggs is taking direct oversight. Confirmed. Transfer set for 72 hours. Ben is alive. Being moved in the last convoy. Destination unknown." Jake closed his eyes. Ghost continued. "They know you're coming. They've set traps, routes rigged. Some of the jackals are scared. Some want out. The whole thing's rotting from the inside." "We break them," Jake said. "You better move fast," Ghost replied. "They're done hiding. Ray's is about to make it personal again." The line went dead. Jake turned to the team. "We hit their routes tonight. We plant fear. We make them bleed before they even load the trucks." They spent the day laying groundwork, scouting terrain, setting IEDs on key backroads, preparing intercept points along the route Ghost had marked. Boone positioned himself on a water tower with a thermal scope ready to flag movement. Doc loaded trauma gear into a stolen ambulance just in case. Brick prepped the charges with Ranger, hands steady even as lightning cracked in the distance. Before sundown, Jake walked alone into the tree line behind the safe house. He needed a moment, just a breath. He pulled the photo of Ben from his jacket. The edges were worn now, creased from being handled too often. "I'm coming," he whispered. "You hang on, kiddo. You hang on." He slid the photo back into his pocket and turned toward the barn where his brothers waited. Hell was coming, and they were bringing it first. The night came heavy with heat, the kind that didn't cool after sundown, that hung on the air like sweat and old sins. The safe house pulsed with quiet movement, low voices, clinking metal, the shuffle of boots on wooden floors. Jake didn't sleep. None of them did. They were too close now, too deep, the kind of deep where every breath felt like it might be. "You're lost if you took it wrong." Ghost's transmission came just after 1 in the morning, a static-laced whisper that cut through the silence like a scalpel. Jake sat in the barn turned op center, leaning over the comms desk, his fingers white on the edge of the table. "I've got your man," Ghost said. He didn't need to say the name. They all knew who he meant. Griggs. Jake closed his eyes and nodded to himself, like he'd been expecting it all along. Of course it was Griggs. It had to be. He's running the route ops personally. Ghost continued. "Ben is being held separate. Solo transport. High-value asset. Their words. Raises. Orders. No contact with the rest of the kids. No movement until Griggs signs off." Jake swallowed hard. "What's the timeline?" 48 hours. Less, maybe. They're running nervous now. Your breach put the fear in them. But Griggs, he's not scared. He's sharpening the machine. Ghost's voice went quiet for a second. Jake waited, the line hissing faintly in the dark. "There's something else," Ghost finally said. Griggs knows. About you. About us. He hasn't said it out loud, but he knows this is you. I can see it in his face. Jake leaned back in. His chair, the wood creaking. His heart pounded, but not with fear, with memory. Griggs had been the kind of soldier who memorized patterns, who could predict an ambush 2 hours before it happened, who always had the cleanest gear and the bloodiest hands. He wasn't just good, he was surgical, efficient, cold. And now he was selling children. Brick stood by the doorway, arms crossed. We take him out? Jake shook his head. Not yet. He's the key. He's the last lock on the cage. Boone stepped forward from the shadows, rifle in hand. So, what's the play? Jake stood, his eyes hard. We split. 2 teams. One hits the supply route, cut off their fuel, slow their vehicles, make them feel boxed in. The other sets up outside the staging area, Ghost identified. When they start, moving we follow. Snatch and grab? Doc asked. No. Shadow and strike. We let them think they're safe. Then we tear their throat out when they get comfortable. They began preparing without another word. Ranger laid out satellite imagery of the staging grounds. An old trucking depot 30 miles west, ringed by rusting fences and a few cameras that wouldn't survive the night. Doc rigged a jammer to knock out surveillance. Boone and Brick built road traps disguised as construction debris. Jake studied everything twice, 3 times, until he could see the layout in his sleep. Ghost sent updates by the hour. Griggs had moved Ben to a separate holding trailer, white, unmarked, locked from the outside, parked in the shade beneath a half-collapsed overpass. He was guarded at all times. No faces, just shadows. No one talked to him. No one touched him. Why? Jake asked over the radio. Ghost paused before answering. They're afraid of you. Jake stared at the comms panel. Good. He stepped outside into the coolness of morning. The sun was a bruise just beginning to bleed over the trees. He lit a cigarette and leaned against the fence. He hadn't smoked in years, but old habits had come clawing back with everything else. His hand shook slightly as he took the first drag. He didn't hear the steps behind him until Brick spoke. You ready to kill him? Jake didn't answer. Brick stepped up beside him. I mean it, Griggs. You know he's not going to go down easy. And this ain't war. Not the kind we knew. This is personal, gets messy. Jake took another drag and blew the smoke. Out slowly. He already signed his fate. When he took Ben, he made his choice. Brick nodded. Good. Just don't flinch when the time comes. I won't. The next night came hard and fast. Ranger's team hit the fuel depot first. 4 tanks punctured, slow leaks that would turn their convoy into a crawling mess. Boone planted eyes along the highway, checking traffic for unusual patterns. Ghost relayed intel from inside, marking every shift change, every weak point in the Jackal's armor. Then the transmission changed. He's moving. Jake's breath caught. Ben, he asked. Yeah, Ghost confirmed. They're prepping the trailer now. Griggs is overseeing it himself. Jake grabbed his gear and signaled the team. We move now. They rode in silence. 2 trucks, 2 bikes, no lights. The moon was high but clouded, their path a ribbon of darkness stretching across the hills. Brick drove, his jaw clenched. Jake sat in the passenger seat, his hand resting on the grip of his rifle. Behind them, Boone and Doc followed in a makeshift medical transport. Armed to the teeth, they reached the ridge overlooking the transfer site in under an hour. Jake peered through the scope, scanning the depot. There it was, the white trailer. Just like Ghost had described, a single-armed guard stood near the hitch, leaning against the wheel well, smoking. Griggs stood 10 feet away, speaking into a satellite phone, pacing slow, deliberate circles in the gravel. Jake focused on him. His face hadn't changed much. Older, leaner, hair gone to silver at the temples, but those eyes, same eyes, calm, dead, calculating. He's right there, Boone whispered. We can end it now. Not yet, Jake said. Wait for Ghost's mark. The minutes dragged, then the signal came. Ghost's voice, low and certain. Now, Jake moved like a wire snapping. They split. Ranger and Doc flanked wide, covering the exits. Brick and Boone descended with silencers ready. Jake advanced straight down the middle. The first guard dropped with a muffled shot. Griggs turned. He saw Jake. Recognition sparked. His mouth curved, not in surprise, not in fear, in satisfaction. "Lawson," he said, as if greeting an old friend. At a funeral, Jake didn't slow. He raised his rifle. "Easy," Griggs said, lifting both hands. "Boy's still alive." "Barely," Jake growled. "I haven't touched him. Not my part of the job." "You still pick the side that does." Griggs's smile faded. "You think this ends here? You kill me, 10 more take my place. You shut this line down, another opens across the border. You're not stopping the machine, Jake. You're just scratching the paint." Jake stepped closer. "You're right, but I'm gonna bury the first gear." He drove the butt of his rifle into Griggs's jaw. The man crumpled. Brick moved in, zip-tied him. Doc rushed to the trailer and yanked the doors open. The smell hit. First, stale sweat, blood, metal. Jake followed him in. Ben lay in the corner. His eyes fluttered open at the sound of his father's voice. "Dad?" Jake dropped to his knees, pulling him close. "I got you," he whispered. "I got you, buddy. I'm here." Ben's arms wrapped around him, weak but real. Jake closed his eyes and breathed for the first time in days. Jake didn't speak on the ride back. Ben lay wrapped in a thermal blanket in the back seat, his head resting on Doc's lap, eyes fluttering in and out of sleep. The boy was pale, thinner than he'd been a week ago, cheeks sunken, lips dry. But he was alive, and Jake couldn't. Stop looking at him through the rear-view mirror, as if the moment he looked away, it might all vanish, like a dream he'd begged for one too many times. They reached the safe house just before dawn, and everything inside changed. The men, Ghost, Brick, Boone, Ranger, stood silently as Jake carried Ben inside, cradled in his arms like when he was just a toddler who'd fallen asleep on the couch after cartoons. No one said a word. There was no need. It wasn't victory. Not yet. It was survival. A fragile, flickering kind of survival that could still be taken away. Doc ran fluids, checked vitals, patched up cuts, and ran scans with equipment most emergency rooms would envy. He didn't ask questions, didn't push. Just kept whispering to Ben, "You're safe now," over and over again, like a prayer for the both of them. Jake sat in a chair across the room, elbows on his knees, face in his hands. The rage that had driven him for days began to shift, to sink into something colder, something deeper. He'd gotten his son back, but the warehouse, the names on that flash drive, the children they didn't reach in time. It wasn't over. He looked at Ghost, who stood near the kitchen counter watching him. "They're not done, are they?" Jake asked. Ghost shook his head. "Not even close." Jake leaned back and stared at the ceiling. "Then we keep going." That night, the team poured through the contents of the encrypted drive Ghost had lifted from Griggs's private SAT-link. Names, routes, banking transfers that traced back to shell companies across multiple states. There were documents, purchase orders masked as adoption records, forged court rulings, digital trails scrubbed through layers of encrypted proxies. One file was labeled simply, "Replacements." Inside were photos of children. Over 200. Each image had a code, age, ethnicity, physical condition, docile, unbroken, defiant. Labels assigned like they were inventory in a warehouse instead of human beings. Boone stepped away from the screen, clenching his fists. Ranger cursed under his breath and walked outside. Even Brick, who hadn't flinched during firefights or breaching, operations, turned away and spat on the floor like he couldn't hold the bile in his throat. Jake didn't look away. "These aren't just the jackals," he said. "This is bigger." Ghost pulled up a series of bank transfers tied to a non-profit foundation registered in Atlanta, one that worked with at-risk youth and offered international placement services. Another was routed through a church in Idaho. A third through a family law firm in South Carolina. "They're laundering kids through systems that are supposed to protect them," Ghost said. Jake stared at the screen. "How high does it go?" "I don't know," Ghost replied, But these judges signing off on custody waivers, they're on the government payroll, some of them federal. Ranger stepped back in. You're saying this reaches D.C.? I'm saying this touches everything, Ghost answered. Law enforcement, social services, even family courts. This isn't a gang problem, it's national. Doc looked at Jake. What do we do with this? Jake leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. We let it out, every file, every name, every transfer. We burn the curtain down. And then what? Brick asked. You think the feds are just going to jump in and arrest their own? We go public and this thing vanishes. They'll close ranks. They'll scrub everything. Jake met his eyes. That's why we don't go to the feds. We go to the people. They stared at him. I mean everyone, Jake continued. Local press, veterans groups, parents, teachers, church networks. We dump this into the bloodstream of the country and let it spread like wildfire. Once it's out, they can't unsee. Ghost nodded slowly. Leak it loud enough and it becomes untouchable. They'll be forced to act. Even if they don't, Jake added. We'll know we didn't stay quiet, not like the rest of them. Doc looked toward the back room where Ben slept soundly. For the first time in days. Let's start with the names, he said. They spent the next 48 hours cataloging everything. Ghost built a dark web mirror of the entire drive, uploading every file to servers across the globe. Brick recorded a voiceover with no names, no identifiers, just a calm, detailed narration of what they had uncovered. Ranger contacted 2 retired journalists he trusted from a previous op, men who'd blown the whistle on war crimes in Kandahar and still bore the scars of telling the truth. The leak went live at dawn. Within hours, it was everywhere. Mom blogs, police forums, military networks, independent news outlets. Social media posts tagged the children, not cargo, began to trend by noon. The backlash was immediate, confused, angry. Denials poured from government agencies. We're investigating. We had no prior knowledge. These documents are unverified, but it was too late. The damage had been done. By nightfall, 4 state offices had been raided by internal affairs. 2 judges named in the files were suspended pending investigation. A family services branch in Missouri was shut down entirely. Anonymous tips began to flood Ghost's burner phone. Parents, social workers, even low-level law clerks who had seen something but never known what they were looking at. And then came the message, a video posted anonymously to one of the Mirror sites. The man in the video wore a suit and sat in a polished office. His face was clear, his voice calm. You've done well, Mr. Lawson, but this won't end with exposure. This isn't a battle you win with outrage. It's a machine. And machines rebuild. You've taken a few gears, but we've got factories. Jake watched in silence. Walk away. Take your son. Go back to your porch and your peaceful little piece of dirt, because if you keep coming, we'll stop hiding. The video ended. Jake sat for a long time, staring at the screen. Then he looked toward the back room again. Ben was awake now, sitting up, drinking from a water bottle, still pale, but stronger. He looked up at his father. I knew you'd come, Jake. Felt the words pierce through every layer of armor he'd worn for days. He walked over, knelt beside the bed, and wrapped Ben in his arms. I'll always come, he whispered. Later that night, Jake stood on the porch of the safe house. The moon was high, the wind steady. Brick stood beside him, lighting a cigarette, with hands still streaked from earlier repairs to the truck. So what now? Brick asked. Jake didn't answer right away. Then quietly he said, now we finish it, because saving one boy wasn't enough, not when the system still devoured the rest. The road to revenge is never paved in one direction. It loops back. It crosses over itself. It digs deep into the bones of the men who walk it. Jake knew that now. The burn of justice was no longer in his fists. It had moved to his blood. It was what kept him standing when he should have been resting, what kept his hands working long after his body was ready to stop. The war had changed shape again. It wasn't about one child anymore. It wasn't even about the jackals. It was About proving that monsters bled like everyone else. They spent 2 days prepping for the next strike. Griggs was locked in the storm cellar of a nearby ranch house belonging to a friend of Boone's, a man who owed them nothing but said yes anyway. There were no calls, no visits, no rescue attempts. The jackals had cut him loose. The machine didn't need a broken part. Jake had stood over him the night they brought him in, watching as the once feared tactician sat handcuffed to a pipe. A trickle of blood dried beneath his nose. Silence where smugness used to live. "You're already dead," Jake told him. "You just haven't accepted it yet." Griggs didn't respond. He hadn't spoken since the ambush, not once. Ghost had other plans. While Jake planned their next move, Ghost was buried in logistics, decoding movement orders, analyzing rerouted supply chains, monitoring chatter on deep web forums where transporters and runners swapped encrypted schedules. Every lead pointed to one thing. The jackals were preparing to move, the last of their operation, out of Texas. "They're bleeding," Ghost said. "You rattled them, you exposed them, now they're fleeing, and that makes them desperate." Jake leaned over the maps, pointing at a spot 10 miles outside of town. "What about here? The old train depot?" Brick shook his head. "No activity for years. It's too obvious." "Exactly," Jake said. "It's obvious to us, not to them. And it's close enough for a fast load and jump. If they think we're still poking around the eastern routes, they'll go for the quick exit." Boone entered from the side door, a field radio in hand. "We intercepted a call from someone using a scrambled jackal frequency. Couldn't catch all of it, but they said the words, 'final run' and 'before dawn.'" Jake's eyes narrowed. "That's the transfer." Brick leaned over the map. "We could block the access roads. Set tire punchers here and here, funnel them into the depot," Ranger added. "We plant a trap, let them walk into it." Ghost looked up from his screen. "They'll have scouts. Probably mercs, too. Maybe ex-military, not bikers. Professionals." Jake nodded. "We'll handle it." That night they moved like wolves. They buried road spikes beneath a thin layer of dust along the southern entrance to the depot. Ranger climbed the abandoned water tower with a rifle and a thermal scope, watching the highways. Doc hid in a storm drain near the outer fence with trauma gear. Boone positioned 2 stolen trucks at a T-intersection leading into the valley road. A blockade set to deploy the moment the convoy turned in. Jake and Brick loaded up with enough firepower to level a small bunker and station themselves near the depot's loading bay. It was quiet there, the kind of quiet that comes before something terrible. The moon hung high, sharp and silver. Coyotes howled somewhere in the distance. Jake leaned back against the wall, his rifle across his lap. "You ever think about what comes after this?" Brick asked. Jake didn't answer at first. "You mean after the jackals?" "No, after the war, the whole damn thing. You get Ben back, you burn the network down. Then what?" Jake looked up at the stars. "I don't know. Maybe I try to remember. What it means to sleep through the night." Brick chuckled once. "You think that's still possible?" Jake didn't respond. Just after 3 a.m., Ranger's voice crackled in on the radio. "Movement, convoy, 8 vehicles, unmarked. 2 scouts on bikes, coming down 41, ETA 10 minutes. Jake clicked his mic. "Copy. Ghost. Status." "Ghosts." Voice came back steady. "I've got eyes on them. They don't know we're here." "Everyone hold," Jake said. "Wait for the lead vehicle to pass the second checkpoint." The depot fell into silence again. Jake crouched behind a pile of rusted crates, peering through the scope of his rifle. Brick crouched beside him, holding a detonator linked to 3 shaped charges buried in the access road. The first vehicle appeared like a phantom, headlights cutting through the dust. A black SUV, followed by a panel van, then 2 more trucks. Then a second SUV, larger, armored. A motorbike flanked them, rider wearing a red bandana and a patch that glinted like oil in the moonlight. "Hold," Jake whispered. "Wait." The second checkpoint passed. Brick clicked the switch. The first explosion tore through the air like thunder from underground. The road vanished in a flash of dirt and flame, and the lead SUV flipped sideways, crashing into the ditch. The convoy Scattered, confusion rippling through the comms like static. The second explosion hit the tail truck, disabling it instantly. Jake and Brick moved, quick and hard, flanking the stunned convoy from the side. Gunfire erupted from the second SUV. Brick returned fire, dropping a shooter through the passenger window. Jake slid behind the van, kicked open the back doors. Children, 3 of them, eyes wide, gagged, terrified. Jake turned to the radio. "Doc, move in, now!" Boone fired from the ridge, picking off anyone who moved without a vest. Ranger relayed targets from the tower, calling out positions like clockwork. Then came the scream. One of the jackals, bloodied and staggering, stumbled from the truck with his hands in the air. Jake dropped him with a shot to the leg and dragged him behind the wreck. The man sobbed. "Don't shoot, I'll talk." Jake pressed his rifle barrel to the man's forehead. "Where's Ray's?" The man shook his head, panting. "Gone. Left 2 days ago. Took the last boy with him. Said he was going to handle it personally. Said he wanted to watch you suffer." Jake didn't blink. "Where?" "Canyon Pass. Smugglers. Route. We used it for guns. He's got it rigged. Mines, traps, the works. Said he'd wait for you there." Jake stood. The man whimpered. "Please, I didn't know." Brick knocked him out cold with a blow from the butt of his rifle. They spent the next 15 minutes clearing the scene. Doc got the kids out first, into the ambulance. Boone swept the vehicles for trackers. Ranger descended from the tower, his eyes already scanning toward the canyon. Jake stood at the center of the broken convoy, the wind whipping through his hair, the dust settling around his boots. Ray's had been. And now there were no more shadows to hide behind, only the canyon and what waited inside it. The canyon lay stretched out like a scar across the land, deep and dry and coiled in silence. It had once been a smuggler's route, back before the wars, back before satellites and drones and the kind of surveillance that turned men into ghosts. Now it was just dirt and rock and memory, forgotten by most, but not by Ray's. He'd chosen it for a reason. The terrain favored ambush, limited access, no cell service, miles from any paved road. And the cliffs, tall and steep, would trap anyone who entered like rats in a maze. Jake stood at the canyon's mouth, with his back to the rising sun, his boots rooted in red dust. His rifle hung across his chest, hands steady, breath even. He'd slept 2 hours the night before. Not because he needed it, because Ben needed him sharp. This wasn't just another strike, it was the final run. The moment where every move had to be perfect, or the whole thing burned. The team had split at dawn. Brick and Boone were positioned on the western ridge, rifles trained on the canyon floor. Ghost had circled wide through a dry creek bed, climbing into position along the northern slope, with eyes on the far side. Doc stayed back with the evac truck, engine humming, radio tuned to 3 separate frequencies. Ranger, always the wild card, volunteered to plant the diversions, a series of smoke canisters and remote detonation frags, along the trail that snaked between the canyon walls. They didn't bring heavy firepower this time, they brought precision. Jake moved first, walking into the canyon alone, gun holstered, hands visible. Dust swirled in the low morning light, and the silence swallowed every step. He passed the first bend, where the rocks narrowed to a choke point, and paused. Wind whipped through the crack above him, carrying the scent of oil and sweat and something. "Sharp? Cordite maybe, or blood?" A voice echoed down from above. "Little late, aren't you?" "Rays?" Jake didn't look up. "Where's my son?" "Don't worry," Rays replied. "He's enjoying the view." Jake stepped forward again, passing a half-buried tire, the remains of an old smuggler's truck rusted into the canyon wall. He could feel the trap tightening. He imagined tripwires strung beneath loose rocks, claymores hidden behind brush, maybe even snipers roosted in the shadows above. But he wasn't afraid. Fear had burned out of him somewhere between the warehouse and the depot. "Why this place?" Jake called out. "Why the theatrics?" Ray's voice came again, closer now. "Because it's poetic. You and me, soldier. This is what you wanted, right? A clean end. No kids. No noise. Just us." Jake stepped around the final bend. And there he was. Reyes stood atop a boulder 15 feet above the canyon floor. He was dressed in black, his vest marked with the red skull of the jackals, a pistol hanging low on his hip. His hair was slicked back, silver streaking the temples. He looked leaner than Jake remembered, like violence had carved him into something sharper. But it was his eyes that carried the truth, cold, flat, empty. At his feet sat Ben, strapped too, the back of a stripped-down dirt bike, duct tape around his wrists, a small black box wired to his chest with blinking red lights. His face was bruised, but his eyes were open, alert. He locked eyes with Jake and didn't blink. Jake's heart stuttered once, then steadied. "Let him go," Jake said. Reyes shook, his head slowly. "You've taken too much. My crew, my money, my name. You think I'm going to let you ride off with a win?" He tapped the box on Ben's chest. "Dead man's trigger, pressure plate under the seat. You shoot me, we all go." Jake didn't move. "That's not a bluff. You'd really kill a child to make a point." Reyes grinned. "I wouldn't be the first." There it was. The truth. No more masks. No more posturing. Just raw, exposed rot. Reyes wasn't just a trafficker or a killer. He was a believer. A man who saw children as currency and suffering as strategy. Jake had faced men like him overseas. Warlords in suits. Politicians with machetes. But none of them had taken his son, until now. Reyes took a step forward, placing one boot on the bike's back wheel. His hand hovered near the trigger. "You came alone," he said. "That's noble, stupid, but noble." Jake didn't answer. He didn't have to, because at that moment Rangers' smoke charges detonated along the canyon walls, white plumes bursting like thunderclouds. Reyes flinched, losing sightlines. Jake moved fast, drawing his sidearm and diving. Left, rolling behind a rock outcrop just as gunfire erupted from above. Boone opened fire from the ridge, suppressing the canyon's western edge. Brick picked off 2 hidden shooters, attempting to reposition near the top path. Ghost dropped into view from the northern slope, rifle spitting precise, short bursts that sent dust and bodies scattering. Reyes screamed, backing away from the bike. Gun drawn, spinning in panic, Jake surged forward. He covered the ground between them in seconds, rising from the dust with his weapon leveled. "Drop it," he yelled. Reyes hesitated, then aimed for the trigger. Jake didn't. His shot hit Reyes square, in the shoulder, spinning him backwards off the boulder. The man tumbled down the side, crashing into the canyon floor with a grunt, weapons skittering from his grasp. Jake didn't wait. He sprinted to Ben, hands working fast, eyes scanning the device. The box was basic, too basic. The wiring was amateur, not Griggs' work. Reyes must have rigged it himself. Jake found the pressure plate beneath the seat, held tight by a spring mechanism. He reached into his belt, pulled a zip tie and slid it beneath the seat, wedging it into place to relieve pressure. "Ben," he said, voice calm. "I'm here." His son looked up at him, eyes full of water but unbroken. "I knew you'd come," Ben whispered. Jake smiled through the sting in his throat. "I always will." With one clean movement, he sliced the wires from the box and cut the restraints from Ben's wrists. The boy collapsed into his arms, shaking. Jake held him tight. Gunfire had gone silent. Ghost radioed in. All clear. Perimeter neutralized. Jake looked down the canyon at where Reyes lay groaning in the dirt. He was alive, bleeding, broken but alive. Brick joined them seconds later, crouching low beside the bike. He looked at the disarmed bomb and whistled low. "You defused that with a zip tie?" Jake nodded. Didn't trust anything else. They loaded Ben into the evac truck minutes later. Doc took him in his arms without a word and disappeared into the cab. Boone and Ranger secured the rest of the canyon, marking bodies and collecting weapons. Ghost remained behind, sweeping for traps. Jake stood over Reyes. The man coughed, blood pooling beneath him. He looked up with a crooked grin. "Go ahead," he wheezed. "Kill me!" Jake knelt beside him, eyes cold. "You don't get the easy." Way out, Reyes tried to laugh, but it turned into a cough. Jake stood, signaling Brick. "Cuff him, he's going to prison. And when they ask who burned his empire to the ground, I want him to say my name." The sun crested the ridge behind them, casting light over the canyon floor. Jake walked toward the truck where his son waited, and didn't look back. They left the canyon just after sunrise, engines growling low as the caravan snaked across the dust-choked back roads of Clear Creek. The wind carried the scent of gunpowder, oil, and sagebrush. No one spoke much. Not Ghost, not Boone, not Brick. The weight of what had happened, what they'd found, what they'd saved, what they'd had to become to do it, hung heavy in every man's silence. Reyes was alive, slumped in the back of the second truck, wrists zip-tied and shoulder-bandaged. His eyes stayed closed, but his smile never quite faded. He knew something. They didn't. Jake could feel it in his bones. Ben rode beside him, wrapped in a blanket, head resting against his father's side. He hadn't said much since the canyon. His breathing was steady, his body warm, but his silence wasn't peace. It was something locked away behind the bruises and the memories. Jake didn't push. He just kept a hand on his son's shoulder, anchoring him to something real, something that wouldn't disappear in the morning light. Back at the safe house, Doc checked Ben's vitals and declared him stable, though dehydrated. No broken bones, some bruised ribs, a mild concussion, but the mental bruises, those would take longer. Jake sat on the edge of the cot as Ben slowly drank from a bottle of water, eyes fixed on the floor. He hadn't cried, not yet. Doc stepped. Outside, giving them space, Jake kept his voice low. Did they hurt you?" Ben shook his head. "Did you see where they took the others?" Another shake. Then slowly Ben lifted his eyes. "I heard things," he said, "but I didn't see much. They kept me in a dark place. Mostly alone." Jake nodded. "You were brave. You did everything right." Ben hesitated, then reached into the blanket. From beneath the folds, he pulled a small, crumpled piece of paper. Jake took it, carefully unfolding it. It was a child's drawing, simple lines and colors, drawn with a stolen crayon on the back of an old receipt. A truck, big, red, and dirty, painted with a skull on the front grille. A license plate with the letters KXJ. Jake stared at it. "You drew this?" Ben shook his head. "The girl did, Jenny, the one in the warehouse. She said the man with the silver tooth drove it. The one who called me special delivery." Jake's pulse spiked. He stood moving fast, calling for Ghost. The team gathered in the barn. Jake laid the drawing on the table. Reyes wasn't the end. Ghost leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "That plate, KXJ, that's not local." Boone grabbed his laptop, punching in the letters. "Oregon Plates, belongs to a freight company. Or it did until it was sold 6 months ago." "To who?" Jake asked. "Private buyer, through a shell corp, no address. But I can track it." "Do it," Jake said. "We missed something. Ben was being moved again. Reyes was the decoy. The real handoff never happened." Ghost's brow furrowed. "Griggs." Jake looked at him. "He gave us Reyes, on purpose." Brick nodded slowly. "So we'd think it was over." Ghost added, "They knew they couldn't outrun us, so they gave us something that looked like closure. We rescued Ben. We exposed the ring. We got the villain. But the real network, it's still running." Boone tapped at his screen. "Got something? That plate pinged on a gas station cam outside Amarillo 2 days ago, westbound." Jake leaned over. "Heading for the border?" "Too obvious," Ghost said. "They'll reroute through secondary roads, maybe Colorado, maybe north. Keep things rural, stay off-grid." Boone's screen blinked. "Wait, new ping, Nebraska, yesterday, small town. No major highways, just farmland and 2-lane roads." Jake nodded. "That's the drop point, that's where the last transfers." "You're going?" Brick asked. "You think they're still moving kids?" Jake answered without hesitation. "I think they've been moving them the whole time." Reyes, still handcuffed, sat silently in the cellar, listening through the air vent above. He grinned. Jake went to see him not long after, descending the narrow steps alone. The light bulbs swung above them, casting long shadows over Reyes's bruised face. "You gave us Ben," Jake said. Reyes tilted his head. "You're welcome." "Why?" "Because I wanted you to feel it. That high. that hope, like you won, like the nightmare was over. Jake didn't blink, Reyes continued. But you didn't win. You just took a bite out of something too big to kill. This isn't a gang. It's not even a ring. It's a system, a living thing. You hurt it, sure, but it's still breathing. Jake leaned in. Not for long. You're just one man, Reyes whispered. You and your broken brothers. You think you scared the machine? You think you stopped it? You haven't even seen its face. Jake stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked back up the stairs. Outside, the team was already prepping gear. The safe house became a war room again. Ranger loaded ammo. Doc packed trauma bags. Boone mapped routes. Ghost uploaded a secure tracker into Jake's phone, linking it to satellite backups in case they were cut off. They all knew what this was. Not a raid, not a rescue, a reckoning. Jake kneeled beside Ben before they left. The boy looked up, tired but stronger. I have to go, Jake said softly. Ben nodded. You coming back? He asked. Jake smiled. I always come back. Ben took his father's hand, held it tight, then let go. Jake stood, gathered his rifle, and walked out into the wind. They drove west. No flags, no fanfare, just the hum of engines and the fire of unfinished war, and behind them, the ashes of a battle that was never meant to end. The road into Nebraska was flat and endless, stitched between fields of wheat and corn that swayed like silent witnesses. The wind never stopped blowing. It whispered through broken fences and rusted silos, carrying the kind of silence that made your skin itch. Jake drove without rest, his eyes locked on the horizon, jaw tight, hands fixed on the wheel like they were part of the frame. The others followed close behind, Boone in the scout truck, Brick and Ranger in the black SUV, Ghost tracking from a drone feed stitched through a dozen stolen satellites. Doc stayed back with Ben. Someone had to keep him safe. Someone had to be the anchor if this went wrong. The town near the drop was a speck. Population under 200, 2 gas stations, 1 post office, a diner that hadn't changed the menu. Since 1968, they rolled through without stopping. No one looked up, no one came out. This place knew better than to ask questions. Jake drove north another 10 miles, then west again, down a dirt path that hadn't seen pavement in 30 years. It led to a canyon. Not a deep one, just a hollow carved out by time and water and quiet sin. They reached the edge at sunset. The sky turned blood orange, and the trees along the ridge caught fire in the light. Below them was the old freight depot, long abandoned, roof half collapsed, the earth chewed through the concrete, weeds and twisted metal swallowing the past. But the place still breathed. A diesel generator hummed low. A silver trailer was backed into the far end of the structure. One-armed man leaned against the back door smoking a cigarette. A second paced the edge of the lot, weapon slung across. His chest, Jake crouched behind a fallen log, binoculars pressed to his face. That's the truck, he said. Same model, same plate, same skull. Ghost's voice came through the comms, flat and low. Thermals show 6 inside the trailer. Movement patterns match human signatures, 4 small, 2 adult. Armed? No way to tell yet. Boone's voice followed. Ridge is tight. I've got a line on the south entrance. No clean shot unless they start moving. Jake adjusted the lens. The smoke from the guard's cigarette curled around the edge of the trailer. Behind him, inside the structure, another figure moved. Tall, broad shoulders, confident posture. A man who didn't check his corners. A man who felt safe. Jake focused in. Reyes was gone. But this was someone else. Another piece of the machine. Brick joined him at the edge of the ridge. We waiting for confirmation? He asked. Jake didn't answer, because he didn't need it. It was them, whoever they were. The next link in the chain. Ranger, Jake said. You in position? Affirmative. Got charges rigged to the southeast wall. Remote detonation on your mark. Ghost? I'll jam their comms at breach. Give you a clean 3-minute window before they scramble. Jake stared down at the trailer, at the children inside, then he whispered, "Go." Everything happened in silence at first. Ghost's signal jammed the radios. The guard with the cigarette looked down at his earpiece, confused. That's when the first charge blew, ripping through the southeast corner and sending smoke and debris into the sky. The second guard yelled, raising his weapon. Boone's shot dropped him in an instant. Jake and Brick moved fast, clearing the south wall with rifles raised, boots pounding across cracked pavement. Ranger came from the left, flanking wide, taking down a runner with a knife to the throat. Ghost descended from the northern bluff, moving like shadow through the chaos. Inside the depot, the tall man tried to flee. He made it to the stairwell before Brick tackled him to the floor. A short scuffle, 2 punches, 1 elbow to the throat. He was down, coughing blood through broken teeth. Jake reached the trailer. He yanked the door. It was locked. He fired twice. At the latch, splintering the hinge, and kicked it open. Inside, the air was thick, sweat, fear, ammonia. 4 children sat huddled in the corner, wide eyes, tear tracks, but alive. The 2 adults with them raised their hands fast, not guards, handlers, unarmed. Jake pulled them out, cuffed them, shoved them to the ground. He stepped inside and knelt in front of the kids. "It's okay," he said. "We're getting you." Out. A boy, maybe 9, looked up at him and whispered, "Are you the soldier?" Jake's throat tightened. He nodded. The boy pointed to the corner. "He left something, said it was for you." Jake turned. Taped to the wall was a small envelope. Plain, no markings, just a single piece of tape. He opened it. Inside was a photograph. Ben, tied to the bike in the canyon. A close-up, and written in red ink on the back, "You're not done." Jake stared at the words. Below them a symbol, a black crown stylized, drawn with sharp lines. Not jackals, not rays, something else. A different brand. He stepped out of the trailer, clutching the note. Ghost met him halfway. "They weren't the last stop," Jake said. Ghost took the photo, eyes narrowing. "That symbol. I've seen it." "Where?" "On intel from Eastern Europe. Human trafficking ops. Montenegro, Belarus. They've been around for years. Always behind the curtain, always one step removed." Jake's hands shook. "They're here now." Ghost nodded. "They've been here. We just didn't see them." Boone approached. "We've got local law inbound. Someone must have heard the blast. We need to move." Ranger jogged up, sweat on his brow. 2 black SUVs on the road in, not marked. Might be feds, might be something else. Jake looked at the photo again. Ben's face stared back. "You're not done," he turned to Ghost. "Scrub the scene, leave no trace. Take the kids to the fallback point." "What about you?" Ghost asked. Jake looked out toward the horizon. "They just made it personal again." Ranger smirked. "Thought it already was." Jake slid the photo into his pocket, loaded a fresh magazine into his rifle, and walked into the rising wind. The machine wasn't dead. It had just changed masks. The rain started as a whisper over the plains, a slow, steady drizzle that clung to the roads and softened the edges of the morning. Jake stood on the edge of a windswept bluff, the horizon stretching empty before him, a ghost-colored sky bending low across the land. He held the photo in his hand, the red ink already beginning to run under the water. "You're not done." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, one from an enemy that hadn't shown its face yet, but was already working beneath the surface, behind the scenes, where real evil always hid. The black crown, crude and sharp, kept repeating in Jake's mind. It was nothing like the jackals. There was no chaos in it, no noise, just cold, deliberate power. They didn't send foot soldiers on loud bikes. They sent shadows. And the message wasn't just about what had happened, it was about what was coming. Ben had barely spoken since the photograph reappeared. The moment Jake showed it to him, the color drained from his son's face. He hadn't needed to explain it. Somehow, Ben already knew. He sat on the floor of the safe house later that night, curled into himself, staring at the flickering propane heater like it held the answers. Jake watched him from across the room. a notebook in his lap, notes on the symbol, the routes, the faces they'd encountered, trying to find the thread, trying to see the bigger picture. Boone came in through the back door with a map under his arm. "I traced the crown," he said. "Interpol flagged it twice last year. Smuggling rings, kids, one in Estonia, one in Morocco. Same mark, same method. Quiet, ruthless, surgical. And both times the operation vanished before anyone showed up. Wiped clean." Jake nodded slowly. "We're dealing with something else now." Ghost stood over the burner laptop, scanning facial recognition reports. "There's chatter about a financier, someone above Ray's. Name's not clear, but I found one nickname that keeps repeating: Monarch." Brick sat on the edge of the table, polishing a knife. "Monarch, like the butterfly?" "No," Jake said. "Like a king." They sat in silence. The room felt smaller with that word in the air. Brick broke it with a low grunt. "You think this monarch has Ben tagged, still watching him?" Jake looked over at his son, who hadn't moved in an hour. "No, I think Monarch sees him as something else. A message? What kind of message?" Jake stood, shoulders squared. "Bait!" He walked outside and lit a cigarette he didn't really want. The rain had stopped, but the wind was rising, sharp and restless. The whole world felt like it was waiting to exhale. Jake stared into the trees for a long time, long enough for Ghost to appear beside him without a word. "There's movement," Ghost said. "Ray's talked. He broke after the transfer, told us what he knew. Not everything, but enough." Jake turned slowly. "Where?" "Cliffside. Old iron mine outside Salina. It's been abandoned for 30 years, but the drone caught a flare. Heat signatures, one vehicle, one man, looks like the same bike they strapped Ben to." Jake's heart dropped into his stomach. "He's still riding it?" "That's not the worst part." Ghost hesitated. "It's rigged, same pressure. System. And he's riding straight toward a drop." "Which drop?" Ghost handed him the map. "Here." Jake's eyes narrowed. "A cliff." Brick walked up behind them. "You think he's going to kill him?" "No," Jake said, already moving. "He's going to try to break me." They were on the road within minutes. The path to Cliffside was jagged and narrow, carved between hills and sheer drops, with nothing but rusted wire fences to separate a wheel from the abyss. They drove fast, pushing the engines to their limit, GPS bouncing from satellite to satellite. The mine sat on a ridge of limestone, a scar of industry now grown over with weeds and brush. At the edge of it all was a plateau, a flat, bare stretch of rock leading to a sudden drop of over 200 feet. That's where they saw him, Ray's, still alive somehow. Still bleeding from his shoulder wound, still pale, still smiling like the devil he'd always been. And Ben, strapped to the same bike, wires running from the seat to a black box duct-taped beneath the chassis. The boy's head was down, but he was conscious, arms tied at his sides. Jake jumped from the truck before it stopped moving. "Don't!" he shouted, raising his hands. Ray's revved the engine once. "Been waiting for you," he called out. His voice echoed across the canyon. "Let him go," Jake said. Ray's grinned. "I already did. It's gravity's turn now." He turned the throttle. The back tire kicked dust and rock as the bike launched forward. Jake ran. Time slowed. Every step felt like a year. The roar of the engine drowned out everything. The wind, the shouting, the pounding of his own heart. Ray's aimed straight for the edge. No detour, no bluff. He meant to go over with Ben still strapped to the bike, but Jake was faster. He dove, arms outstretched, and caught the frame of the bike just as it reached the lip of the cliff. The bike skidded, bucked, nearly flipped over, but Jake's weight dragged it sideways. It rolled once, slamming Jake against the rocks. Ben cried out. The black box sparked. Brick was there a moment later, slamming his boot into the engine, stopping it cold. Ghost tore the wires free with gloved hands, while Doc ran in with a trauma kit already open. Boone trained his rifle at the canyon edge, but Ray's was gone. They found his body 40 feet down, broken on the rocks, eyes still open, blood spreading across his chest. Ben cried for the first time since the day he was taken. Jake held him against his chest, whispering his name over and over until the boy's sobs slowed and turned into hiccups. Then silence. Jake didn't move. He didn't breathe. He just held him. Brick stood back, watching the wind curl over the cliff's edge. He was never going to stop, he said. No, Jake answered, because someone told him not to. Ghost pulled the crumpled drawing from his jacket. The red skull, the crown. We still have a long way to go. Jake nodded, but for now, Ben was safe, and that was enough to keep going. They buried Ray's in the canyon he chose to die in, or maybe just didn't have time to escape. Jake didn't say a word at the edge of that broken earth. He just stood over the shallow grave with his arms folded across his chest, watching the dust settle on the rocks. No marker, no cross, just stone and silence. Boone had carried the body down, wrapped in a tarp. Brick dug the grave. Ghost stood guard until the last handful of dirt was thrown. No one spoke his name. Back at the safe house, the lights burned low as night rolled across Nebraska, and the world began slowly to exhale. The kids rescued from the trailer were asleep in borrowed blankets on old mattresses, their breathing soft and steady for the first time in days. Doc stayed near them, checking vitals, whispering calm when nightmares came. Ranger stood watch by the front door, a rifle balanced across his chest. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, quiet and cold. Ben sat at the kitchen table, a mug of warm water between his hands, his eyes fixed on the steam rising from it. Jake stood at the sink, staring through the window at nothing in particular. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from release, from the adrenaline that had kept him upright for days, had drained out of him like a slow leak in a tire, and now there was only gravity, heavy and still. Ben looked up. "Are we going home?" Jake turned, walked over, and crouched beside him. "Yeah, buddy, we're going home." Ben nodded once. "Is it over?" Jake hesitated. "For us. For now." Ben reached out and took his hand. His grip was stronger than Jake expected. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. Jake didn't answer. He just held his boy and let the moment be what it needed to be. At sunrise, federal agents arrived. 3 black SUVs. No sirens, no uniforms, just sharp suits, cold eyes, and credentials flashed at the door. They said they were from a joint task force, sent to investigate the trafficking network exposed by the data dump Jake and his team had released. They asked questions, polite ones. But there was something beneath their words, something rehearsed, careful, like men walking. Through a minefield they couldn't quite map, Jake gave them what they asked for: the coordinates, the names, the routes, the files. He didn't mention the Black Crown. He didn't mention Monarch. He watched their reactions, noted every flicker of discomfort when a child's name was read, every twitch when Griggs was mentioned. Every too casual, "We'll look into it." They took Ray's body, said there would be an autopsy, promised to pursue the larger operation. Jake didn't believe them. Neither did Ghost. After the agents left, Jake stood on the porch with Brick watching the sun rise over the field. "They'll bury it," Brick said. "Yeah," Jake replied. "But we still did it," Brick added. "We got them back. We stopped something." Jake nodded. "We tore a hole. That's more than most ever do." Boone joined them, lighting a cigarette with a shaking hand. "Town's waking up," he said. "Sheriff Doolin just called. Said people are talking, starting to understand what's been happening around them. Parents, teachers. They want to help." Jake turned toward him. "Then let them." Later that morning, a caravan of townsfolk arrived. They brought supplies, blankets, food, clean clothes, a nurse, a retired cop, a pastor. No one asked for anything. They just helped. Brick set up patrol schedules for the ranch and safe house perimeter. Boone and Ranger began training 3 locals on field radios and recon work. Ghost slipped away before noon. Left a note on Jake's truck windshield that simply read, "Until needed." Jake watched Ben playing outside in the grass with 2 of the rescued kids, laughing, smiling, tired but free. Doc came up beside him, folding his arms. "You ever think we'd make it out of this?" Jake didn't answer right away. "I stopped asking that question a long time ago. Doc nodded. You know it's not over. Jake looked up. Yeah, there's more out there. Jake turned toward the field. Then let them come. That night, the safe house glowed from within like a heartbeat. Candles on tables, quiet voices, no gunfire, no screaming, just the sound of people being alive. Jake stood in the barn, looking. Over the last folder Ghost had left behind. Inside were new names, new roots. A photo of a man with a blurred face and a caption underneath, Monarch. Jake closed the folder and slid it into a drawer. For now, they had won. For now, Ben was home. And that would be enough. Until it wasn't. Clear Creek hadn't changed much. In the weeks since Jake had gone to war, the storefronts still stood with their peeling paint and old glory flags. The diner still served burnt coffee. The school bell still rang at 8 sharp every morning. But something under the surface was different now, like the whole town had been forced to look into a mirror and couldn't quite recognize the face staring back. Jake returned quietly, just him and Ben, driving the old Bronco down Main Street, as if they were just another father and son heading home after a fishing trip. But people noticed. They stepped out of stores, paused mid-sentence on sidewalks. They watched him, not with suspicion this time, not with gossip on their tongues. This was something else. Shame, gratitude, a guilty kind of awe. Ben sat in the passenger seat, hands in his lap, eyes scanning the windows. He hadn't spoken much since they left the safe house, not even when they crossed the county line. But now, as they passed the school, he whispered, "It looks smaller." Jake nodded. "That's what happens after you've seen too much." They pulled into the driveway of their modest house. 2 bedrooms, old porch, a flagpole out front with a folded flag still sitting in the lockbox. Everything was where it had been, down to the porch light that always flickered when it turned on. Jake helped Ben inside, sat him down with a glass of juice, and then walked the perimeter twice. Old habits still alive, still necessary. By nightfall the knock came. Mayor Lawson stood on the front steps in a navy suit 2 sizes too big and a face too pale for the words he tried to say. Behind him stood Sheriff Doolin and a few other town officials. None of them meeting Jake's eyes for more than a second at a time. "We wanted to thank you," the mayor said, holding out a plaque wrapped in a velvet cloth, "for everything you did." Jake didn't take it. Instead, he leaned against the porch beam, arms folded. "Where were you?" Ellison blinked. What? When Ben was taken. When those kids went missing. When the Winters house burned to the ground. Where were you?" The mayor shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't know what was really happening. You knew enough to stay quiet." The words landed like a slap. Doolin cleared his throat. "Look, Jake, the town was scared. We thought it was just a gang. No one could have imagined—" Jake cut him off. "You thought if you stayed small, the trouble would pass over you. You thought if you shut your mouth and looked away, you wouldn't lose anything. But you lost everything anyway. You just didn't realize it." Ellison stepped forward, the plaque still in his hands. "We just wanted to say thank you. Formally." Jake stared at him for a long moment. Then he took the plaque, turned, and set it on the porch rail. He looked at Ben through the window, sitting at the table, drawing quietly. "You want to thank me?" Jake said without turning around. "Start telling the truth. Hold your own people accountable. Make noise. Raise hell. That's what stops them. Not silence. Not this." He tapped the plaque once. "This doesn't mean a thing." The mayor nodded slowly. "We understand." "No," Jake said. "You don't, but maybe you will." They left quietly. Jake stood there for a while, staring at the stars. The air felt heavier in town, thick with things unsaid, but there was something else now, too. A stirring, a discomfort that might grow into something better. The next day, the church was full, not for a sermon, not for a holiday, for a meeting. Parents, teachers, store owners. People Jake hadn't seen speak a full sentence in months now took turns. At the mic, reading from crumpled notes, their voices shaking as they told the things they'd seen and ignored. Cars that didn't belong, strange men asking questions, kids who'd stopped showing up for school. Some cried, some shouted, all of them listened. Sheriff Doolin stood and read off the names of the children who had gone missing in the past 5 years. 12 in total, most of them never found. A silence followed each name, long and hollow. Then came the names of those who were rescued. Ben's name was last. When Jake entered the room, the crowd stood, not for applause, for respect. He didn't speak that night. He sat in the back row, hands folded, eyes steady, watching the town try to grow a spine. It was messy, it was slow, but it was something. The following week, flyers went up around town. Clear Creek Neighborhood Watch, Veterans Welcome, Brick, led the first training session on a Saturday morning behind the firehouse. By the end of the week, 20 people had signed up. Ghost, true to form, remained missing, though Jake suspected he was closer than anyone realized. Ben went back to school that Monday. Jake walked him to the front steps. Other kids waved. Some didn't know what to say. A few teachers nodded solemnly, then looked away. Ben clutched Jake's hand a little tighter. "You okay?" Jake asked. Ben nodded. "Yeah." "You want me to stay?" Ben looked up. "No, I think I can do this." Jake crouched down and smoothed his hair. "I'll be here when you're done." Ben smiled, small but real, and walked through the doors. Jake stood there long after the bell rang, watching, waiting, and for the first time in a long time he felt something he didn't expect. Hope. Fragile, new, but real. The war wasn't over. He knew that, but for the moment they'd taken back one small piece of ground, and sometimes that's where it starts. The old community center had once been a place for bingo nights and church potlucks. Now it had maps pinned across the walls, tactical radios stacked on folding tables, and a rotating group of volunteers working out of what Jake had half-jokingly started calling the war room. Word had spread, quietly, but fast. Veterans from nearby counties started showing up, most of them older, grey at the temples, worn out in body but still sharp behind the eyes. They came without questions. Some brought gear, some brought scars. All of them brought the same look, the look Jake knew too well. A man who'd seen the edge and come back but never quite found peace on this side of it. Brick took command. Of the drills, he didn't waste time. He taught civilians how to move through buildings, how to handle weapons, how to watch windows and not freeze when pressure hit. Boone handled surveillance training, teaching farmers how to sweep for bugs and look for patterns in traffic and behavior. Ranger set up the comms network, bouncing signals between barns and fire towers and the local radio station, disguising encrypted chatter in the same playlists they used to play gospel on Sundays. Doc held medical briefings every week, teaching emergency triage with a stack of old towels and a first aid kit more suited for Baghdad than Nebraska. The strange part was how fast it all clicked. These people had been scared. They'd been quiet, but they weren't weak. They'd just forgotten how to fight, and now, standing in those dusty rooms beside veterans who treated them like equals, something was coming back. Not anger, not revenge, something older, something rooted deep, a need to protect what was theirs. Jake watched it all unfold with a kind of tired pride. He hadn't planned to stay, not this long, not after Ben was safe, but each day pulled him deeper. The more he saw the faces of the kids they'd rescued, the more he saw how close they'd come to being erased, the harder it became to walk away. Ghost was gone again. Vanished the day after Ben went back to school. No note this time, just a burner phone left on Jake's porch with a single contact saved in it, in case. No one had seen him since. Jake figured that was the way it had to be. Some men are just smoke and distance. He'd come back if he was needed. He always did. Then something unexpected happened. 3 men rode into town on bikes one morning, former jackals. Jake watched them from the sidewalk outside the feed store, hand resting on the grip of his sidearm, expecting the worst. But they didn't come armed. They didn't come loud. They came with shaved patches, hollow eyes, and a woman's photograph clutched in the hand of the one in front. He was tall, mid-30s, knuckles tattooed, a scar cutting across his cheekbone. He approached Jake slowly. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just want to help." Jake didn't answer at first. The man held out the photo, his sister, taken, sold, never found. The man had joined the jackals thinking they were protection, brotherhood. What he found was rot. He stayed, he admitted. He was too scared not to. Until now, Jake took the photo, studied it, then handed it back. "You want to help?" he said. "Then earn it." They did. They helped unload supplies, patrolled the school, dug trenches for the new training range. One of them cried after his first shift, after walking one of the rescued girls home from school and seeing her smile up at him without knowing who he used to be. He didn't say a word about it, just cried, then went back to work. Jake didn't forget what they'd been, but he didn't turn them away either. Redemption didn't mean wiping the slate clean. It meant carrying the weight of your past and choosing to walk anyway. Ben adjusted better than anyone expected. He had nightmares. Some nights he'd wake up crying. Some mornings he wouldn't speak until noon. But he walked to school every day. He joined the chess club. He started helping Doc organize the field kits, learning how to stop a bleed, how to tie gauze tight enough to matter. He wasn't the same boy he'd been. That innocence was gone, but something stronger had grown in its place. One afternoon, Jake found him in the backyard, fixing the chain on his bike, grease on his fingers, sunlight on his shoulders. He looked up and said, "Can I go with you next?" Jake knelt down beside him. "There won't be a next time," he said. Ben looked him in the eye. "You don't believe that?" Jake smiled, small and sad. "No, I don't." But he hoped. God, he hoped. News had started to leak outside of Nebraska, not the sanitized versions, the real stories. Whispers about the Black Crown, about Monarch, about the parts of the trafficking ring that hadn't gone down with Ray's. Journalists started asking questions. Congress held 2 briefings, but the machine was still grinding forward just under the surface, and Jake knew it. He spent his evenings at the safe house now, watching old footage, tracking new movements, following leads that most people wouldn't see as anything more than noise. The war had changed its shape. It wore suits now. It smiled through the news, but it was still there, and Jake was still watching. One night, just past midnight, he found a box on his porch. No return address. Inside, a single photo. A child. Not. Then another boy. Different town, different state. Jake flipped it over. No message. Just a symbol in red ink, the crown. He closed his eyes. His fingers curled around the photo. Then he stood, walked to the garage, and uncovered the duffel bag he hadn't touched in a week. Brick found him there 20 minutes later, checking his gear. "You got something?" he asked. Jake nodded. "Another kid." Brick didn't hesitate. "Then I'll start the truck." They didn't have uniforms. They didn't have flags, but they had each other. And sometimes that's all it takes to stand against the dark. The wind moved softly through the cottonwoods that lined the edge of the schoolyard. The kind of breeze that promised spring was almost here. The sun hovered low over the rooftops of Clear Creek, spilling golden light across sidewalks and rust-colored fences. Jake stood under the old elm by the flagpole, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes on the front doors of the school. Every morning was the same now. He got up at 5, made coffee, sat quietly while Ben got dressed and packed his lunch. Then he walked him to school and waited there until the bell rang. Not because he didn't trust the world, but because the world had proven it didn't deserve that kind of trust. Ben emerged from the building with a half-smile and his backpack slung over one shoulder. He moved with that same quiet focus Jake remembered from his own childhood, like a boy who saw more than he said, who was always measuring the room before he spoke. He wore a dark hoodie and jeans, and the soles of his sneakers were wearing thin. But there was a calm to him now, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. Jake bent down as Ben approached and opened his arms. The boy didn't say anything, just leaned into the hug, holding tight for a few seconds longer than usual. Then he pulled back and looked up. "You okay?" Jake asked. Ben nodded. "Miss Lawrence gave me a B+ on my essay." Jake raised his eyebrows. "Yeah? What was it about?" Ben paused. "A hero." Jake smiled softly. "Who'd you write about?" Ben kicked at the dirt and looked away, a shy grin creeping across his face. "Just some guy I know." Jake didn't push it. He just ruffled his hair and started walking. Beside him, the gravel crunching under their feet as they crossed the lot. The days had begun to settle into a rhythm again. Not normal, not after everything, but something close enough to pretend. People in town were different now, not all better. Not all brave, but different. They nodded when Jake passed by. Some even waved. A few still looked away. But the silence that once protected the rot had cracked, and that was enough for now. At home, Jake kept busy. The fence around the property needed mending. The Bronco's engine was acting up again. The shed had a leaky roof, and the pasture had gone too long without being cleared. It was the kind of work that let his mind wander, and he welcomed the ache in his muscles at the end of the day. It kept the rest of him quiet. Ben helped when he could. He'd started asking more questions about tools, knots, how to handle a horse, how to find your way through the woods without a map. Jake answered every one, sometimes with words, sometimes by just showing him. One afternoon they were working on the front gate when Ben paused, squinting at the sky. "Did you ever think I wasn't going to make it back?" Jake didn't look up from the hinge he was tightening. "No." Ben was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I did." Jake stopped, looked over. "I thought I was going to disappear like the others, that nobody would come, that I was just gone." Jake set the wrench down and sat back on his heels. The air between them stilled. "You weren't gone," he said. "You were never gone, not to me." Ben nodded, biting his lip. "I was scared." "I know. I didn't cry." Jake smiled. "I know that too." Ben looked up. "But when I saw you, when you came into that place, I just knew. Like my brain didn't even believe it, but my body did. Like I could feel it." Jake felt his throat tighten. "I never stopped walking," he said. Ben smiled. "I know." There was a silence between them then. Not awkward, just deep. A silence that held everything they hadn't said yet and everything they didn't need. That evening, Jake found himself sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the last light fade. The stars came out slowly one at a time. The dog barked once in the distance, then went quiet. Somewhere out on the road, a truck passed, headlights bouncing off the hedgerow. Brick pulled up a few minutes later, climbing out of the pickup with a bag of tools and a look that said something was coming. "They're starting to stir again," he said, sitting beside Jake. "Got word from Montana. Same routes, same names." Jake didn't answer. "I know you're trying to settle," Brick continued, "and I get it, but this isn't over. We can't walk away from it." Jake nodded. "I'm not walking away." Brick looked over at the front window where Ben's shadow passed behind the curtain. "He's a good kid." "Yeah," Jake said. "He's better than I was." "You're teaching him, right?" Jake took a sip of coffee, then stood. "Let's get ready, just in case." They moved to the barn and began unpacking the crates Ghost had left behind, each one marked with numbers, initials, and silent warnings. Ammo, medkits, communications gear, maps with coordinates scribbled along the margins. Some of the names were circled in red, others had question marks, a few were crossed out. Jake stared at one folder in particular. It held the photo of a little girl, missing from a reservation in Arizona, last seen with someone wearing the same symbol they'd found on the back of Ben's photo. The crown. Jake set it aside. The next morning, he walked Ben to school again. This time Ben held his hand a little tighter. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. And when they reached the steps, he turned to Jake with a different look in his eyes. Older, calmer, full of something like understanding. "You don't have to wait today," he said. Jake raised an eyebrow. "I'll be okay," Ben added. Jake knelt down, looked him in the eyes, and nodded. "I know." Ben smiled and walked inside. Jake stood for a moment, watching the door close. Then he turned and walked home through the morning light, boots scuffing the gravel, the sun at his back, and something new in his chest. Not peace, but pride. The kind that anchors a man even when the world around him shakes, because his boy was home. And the fight, no matter how long it lasted, hadn't taken that away. The wind rolled in from the north that morning, dry and sharp, carrying with it the scent of something old, cedar, dust, diesel. Jake stood in the garage, sleeves rolled up, hands buried in the guts of his old truck. The engine had been dying for months, and now he was giving it new life with rebuilt parts and patience he hadn't had before. He wiped his hands on a rag and stared down at the open hood, feeling the quiet buzz of the town stretching out around him like a slow heartbeat. He'd started sleeping again. Not every night, not without interruption, but enough to feel the difference, enough to wake up with purpose instead of dread. Ben was thriving. There were still shadows in his eyes sometimes, still moments when he'd flinch at sudden noises or fall silent when someone mentioned certain names. But he laughed again. He teased Jake about his graying beard. He talked about high school like it was something he could actually reach. Jake watched him from the kitchen window most mornings, sitting on the porch swing with a comic book, one leg folded beneath him, the dog sprawled at his feet. There was a gentleness in the way Ben moved now. Not weakness, just peace, earned peace. The mailbox rattled near the road, a passing delivery truck kicking up dust as it drove off. Jake set down his tools and walked out to grab the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, unmarked except for a red crown printed faintly at the top. Beneath it a date. No name, no threat, just a time and a location 4 nights from now in Utah, near the Canyonlands, remote, wild, unpoliced. Jake folded it neatly, slid it into the back pocket of his jeans and went back to work. He didn't. I'd tell Ben right away. He didn't have to. That night at the dinner table, Ben looked up from his plate. "It's starting again, isn't it?" Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Looks like it," Ben swallowed. "Do you have to go?" Jake looked at him for a long moment, then said, "No." Ben waited, reading the silence between the lines. "But you will," he said. Jake smiled gently. "Yeah, I will." Ben pushed his plate away and stared out the window. "When I grow up," he said, "I think I want to be someone like you." Jake reached across the table and put his hand on his son's. "Don't be like me, Ben. Be better." Ben nodded slowly. "Then I'll learn from you and do more." Jake squeezed his hand. "That's all I could ask for." The next morning, Jake packed light. Just the essentials. Weapons cleaned, maps marked, clothes rolled tight into a canvas duffel that smelled like rain and old leather. Brick arrived an hour before dusk. Boone followed 10 minutes later, pulling up in a truck that had more dents than paint. Ranger radioed in from the ridge. Doc had gone ahead already, meeting with a contact near Moab who had eyes on a rumored safe house connected to the Black Crown. Ghost hadn't been heard from in weeks, but Jake knew he'd show. He always did. Ben came to the porch as they loaded up. He handed Jake a folded note, sealed with tape. "Don't open it till you're on the road." Jake nodded, slipped it into his jacket and hugged his son. Tight, long, fierce. Then he climbed into the passenger seat of Brick's truck and watched the town disappear behind them in the rearview mirror. An hour out, Jake opened the note. Inside were just 4 words. "Come back with fire." He smiled and folded it again, sliding it into his shirt pocket, close to his chest. The route west was long and familiar. Every mile brought back memories, some sharp, some dulled with time. They stopped only for fuel and silence. The men didn't speak much anymore. They didn't need to. Every one of them knew what they were riding toward. Another layer of the machine. Another child who wouldn't be missed by the ones in power. Another hole in the world to be filled with smoke and steel. When they reached the canyon overlook in Utah, the moon was already high. The safe house sat below them in a natural bowl of stone, lit by a single generator, shadows moving behind darkened. Glass! Boone scanned with thermal optics. Doc confirmed movement. At least 3 children, armed guards. Patterns matching everything they'd seen before. Jake stood at the edge of the ridge, wind snapping through his jacket, hands resting on his belt. No fear, no hesitation, just the same cold fire that had carried him through it all. Ghost's voice came in over the radio at 1:03 a.m. "I'm inside." "Confirmed target, Monarch's second lieutenant. She's here, she's real." Jake keyed the mic. "You ready?" Ghost chuckled. "I was born ready." Jake turned to the others, nodded once. They moved like shadows, silent and fast, slipping down the rocks with precision born from years of war and more recent pain. The first breach was clean. 1 guard dropped without a sound. The second tried to run and made it 3 steps. By the time the alarm tripped, the house was already surrounded. Jake led the entry. The blast blew the door clean off the hinges. Inside, the lights flashed red. Sirens howled, but the children were already being moved. Doc grabbed the first 2, Ghost the third. Jake cleared the hall and stepped into the main room. She stood there, tall, poised, eyes black as stone. Monarchs. Lieutenant, no name, no weapon in hand, but the look she gave Jake was like ice. "You're too late," she said. Jake raised his rifle. "You always say that." "I'm not your enemy," she replied. "You're everyone's enemy." She smiled. Jake didn't shoot. Not yet. She dropped something on the ground, a phone maybe, or a device. It blinked once, then her voice, low and cruel. "You have no idea what's coming next." Jake stepped forward, raised the barrel, and ended the sentence. 1 clean shot. It was over in an instant. The children were safe. The house was ashes by sunrise, and as the smoke rose into the canyon sky, Jake stood at the edge of it all, heart steady, breath even. He took the note from Ben out of his pocket. "Read it again. Come back with fire." He smiled and turned toward the east, toward home, toward whatever came next, because the fire wasn't just destruction anymore. It was legacy.